I've spent over $100,000 on AI over the last 16 months, helping Launch Club hit record revenue every month for 10 months straight, and Foundation generate over $512,000 in revenue, as well as 2 other businesses get acquired. What my team and I have learned is this: the operators winning in go-to-market right now aren't using better tools or better prompts. They've just escaped the copy-paste context switching loop entirely. They're running a system that compounds and works around them, instead of trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. In this course, we're going to take you all the way from getting started in Claude Code as a complete beginner to building your own agents, systems, and skills as an advanced go-to-market operator and sharing them with your team to go multiplayer. We'll start with setup, then get you into how to make your own AI work durable so it actually compounds over time. From there, I'll show you how to build your own tool integrations, skills, and systems from scratch for any tool you use. We'll even build a live go-to-market signal together so you can see exactly how I prompt in real time. The whole course comes with a companion repo. Everything we discuss is ready to use in there. Just point Claude Code at it and clone it, as you'll learn later in the video. Then we chain it all together, build a real live campaign, and close out with how a full go-to-market operating system is actually structured, plus advanced tips to get everything out of Claude Code once you've got the foundation. Let's rock. Basically, anything you can think of is possible in Claude Code. Your imagination is only the limit once you get through this end-to-end course, okay? So I've also given you guys a companion. This GitHub repo is entirely open, and it includes all of the best tools that I use to run and build my own projects, to manage my repositories, to have Claude Code tear me a new one, for lack of a better term. And it'll take you through a very, very easy to run starter repo that I think really isn't overwhelming. It'll walk you through tools to set up that we'll cover throughout this video. It'll walk you through a few baseline skills that'll get you going on just some good methodologies and good systems. And it'll just put you in a good place to succeed with Claude Code. As you can see, we're refreshing because it adds some MCPs that I think are completely irrelevant. Now, let's actually dive in. The other thing you're going to learn is how to deploy your own workflows directly from Claude Code through TriggerDev, but we can get into that a little bit later. This is a video that you can skip around, okay? But the first thing we need to do, if you're already set up, skip this and get into the thick of things. But to get set up, you're going to need Cursor. Go to the Cursor website, download it, and install it. Cursor is simply an interface for you to manage your work from. The reason you want this instead of just a terminal is because, I'll show you. It gives you a beautiful, beautiful interface that you can actually see your documentation in, see your files in, and make sure that you actually know what's going on within the confines of your work, okay? Now, once you have Cursor, you're going to want to get set up inside of it. All you're going to do is open a folder on your computer, okay? So I'm in my downloads. Hopefully I don't leak anything silly, but you're going to open a folder on your computer, and inside of that folder, wherever you put it, you're going to initialize inside the folder, okay? So that's going to be as simple as going to Cursor and being like file, open file, okay? Once you open a file, that is now where Claude is going to live. So inside of that file, add any context you deem relevant. Now, I would recommend getting started with standard operating procedures, the way you like to do things, okay? You can also get started with transcripts. Speaking of which, the very first skill you should build is going to be a transcript fetcher, and I'll show you how easy that is to build a little bit later on. Once you're in the terminal, you're going to install Claude Code. It's a simple npm install. You can get it directly from the Claude website. Once it's properly installed, you're off to the races, and you'll be able to initialize Claude with your own subscription. If you don't want to use your own subscription, right? If you think it's too expensive, which I have 3 as a business, I think it's the highest leverage thing you can possibly have. However, we are starting to notice usage going down, and we're looking at alternatives. If you notice your usage starting to get bottlenecked, then what you're going to want to do is come over here to the companion and go to DeepSeek Stack. In here, I'll teach you how to actually embed DeepSeek models like their V4 Pro. And what is a model? This is just a different type of AI like ChatGPT or like Claude. And you'll be able to actually follow this guide. If you just paste it into Claude, it'll do it for you. So you'll need a baseline subscription to get it set up, right? You need at least the $20 a month. But if you don't want to pay 100 or 200, you can run Claude Code from DeepSeek, and it is 30, it's up to 100 times cheaper to run than a typical Claude model. So this can give you what you need to get rolling, okay? Full tutorial, full breakdown directly inside of here, from setting up your account through to getting your key, so on and so forth, okay? Now, once you're set up and inside Claude, things are gonna look like this. I would recommend creating some simple voice commands in order to pick the models you want to run. I'll give you an example. Use DeepSeek. And there you go. That's my DeepSeek model there. Now, if I were to say, and hit escape if you want to clear your terminal, if I were to say use Sonnet, it's going to run Sonnet. If I were to say Claude YOLO, it's going to use dangerously skip permissions, which basically means YOLO, you only live once, just let it fly. Would not recommend using this when you first start out. And then from there, it's going to use my default model. Now, your default model can be set by Claude. There's going to be a trend you notice in this video in that almost everything can be done by Claude for you if you just give it a link to context, a screenshot, and a reasonable enough explanation. I would highly recommend using voice control when you interact with Claude. And there's a lot of open source repositories, which if you don't know what a repository is, we're going to get into that as well, which is simply a GitHub, which is what I've been showing you here. Okay. Which brings me to the final thing you're going to want to set up as you go through your companion guide, which is setting up your GitHub. So once you're in Claude and you have it set up, you're going to want to get set up with GitHub. Now, once you have your GitHub, you're going to sync the GitHub CLI. Whenever you want to set something up, just type in github.com and what you want. From there, you can see we have the GitHub CLI, which takes GitHub to the command line. What is a CLI? A CLI stands for a command line interface. Now, there's just a lot of jargon, so let's actually just be super clear. All this is giving your AI tools to interact with, similar to a model context protocol. The reason you don't want to use a model context protocol is because a model context protocol will shove information into, it'll shove information directly into the model all the time, not just when you want it. It's like when you're getting home and you're in a rush, you forgot something, and your dad decides to give you a life lesson on the stairs, like in Invincible, when Omni-Man in season 1, Mark's trying to get back to Amber, and Omni-Man's just grilling him, giving him life lessons. That's what MCP does. Your model doesn't need that. That's going to cause something called context rot, which basically, just like you do, you have too much on your plate in a day, you start to forget stuff, right? And we don't want to forget stuff. So once you have the GitHub CLI, which look, it gives you the command right here. And if you ever need a command, I have to tell you, just simply grab it directly from AI mode, AI overview, and plop it in. This is going to let you interact with GitHub. Now, this is a good time to actually go into why GitHub is so important. So if we go back to this repository, we can see that there's been commits yesterday, 16 minutes ago, right? The reason you want to have GitHub is to have version control. Just like my wife remembers every good thing and bad thing I've ever done, that's what GitHub does, okay? And so GitHub is going to be your source of truth, okay? Whenever you make a project, it's going to be a GitHub, okay? This is your file system in the cloud. So if you ever make a mistake on your computer by running dangerously skip permissions, as long as you haven't given it access to flush the GitHub or delete the GitHub, you're safe. You always have a backup. Now, to go into a little bit more detail about what GitHub is and how it operates, I love this image. So basically what GitHub is your knowledge base, right? And inside of your organization, right, or your workspace or your company, you might have a lot of different projects. You might have one for design. You might have one for go-to-market. You might have one for marketing, right? AI can access all of these at a moment's notice locally on your file system, right? In GitHub, what this lets you do is share what you do locally with your team. It's the best way to put it. You can think of it as project management for coding, okay? The difference here is that we're not just doing coding. So the really, really important things I would like to hammer home with you today is something called issues, which is an issue is basically like you come over and you finish a task, right? And you're like, you know what? Jessica needs to take care of this task. And so what's going to happen with Git is you're going to say, Claude, create an issue, right? To give Jessica this task. And at the same time, make sure you push, right? We can see git add, git push, git fetch. Make sure you push from my files to GitHub, okay? And when Jessica finishes the task, right? Good job, Jessica. We're going to have GitHub push back. We're going to pull it. So it's fetching. I call it pulling. But we fetch it back to our local repository so we can create harmony. Now, the key here is that an issue does not mean that it is added directly to the main branch, basically the main file system. It's kind of like leaving a comment on a standard operating procedure. or on the copywriting document from your team, okay? One of the most important things to understand when working with Claude Code is Git. Git is what is going to give you control. That's the best way I can put it. And when it comes to this infinite leverage that agents are, especially towards go-to-market, if you don't have control, you just have a bunch of toddlers with rocket launchers running around, and it's just going to create a big mess, okay? Instead, we want to have those toddlers on leashes, like at Wonderland, okay? No, but in all seriousness, it gives you control, and it gives you, with control, you have real leverage. So I'm not going to pretend to be the utmost expert on Git, but I have a cursory understanding of it that lets me get my AI to do the work I need it to do. But basically, you have 4 areas. You have your remote repository. This is like the GitHubs I'm going to show you and have been showing you throughout the video. This can be cloned, right? So that you can have it on your local machine. On your local machine, right? Local repository, you can do work on it in your workspace. When you finish work in your workspace and you would like it to be something that is saved, like a video game, right? Git really is a video game. It's a time machine. You get to create checkpoints so that when you make mistakes, you can always go back. If you lose a life, you can always go back and you can save scum, okay? Git is your save scum system in multiple layers, okay? So when you git add, you are staging for something to be committed to the local repository. Before it's committed, what's gonna happen is Claude Code is gonna be like, is there conflict, right? If there is no conflict, it gets pushed into the local repository. And then you can actually push it from the local, or committed, I should say, right? It's very key language here. And then from local, it can be pushed to remote. And that's when multiplayer happens, right? Other people can engage with it. They can do the same process, right? So now remote has changed and you can fetch from remote to local, compare local to your workspace, and make sure that actually using that is a good idea. Anytime you have problems, you can fetch old versions, right? Or you can fetch, or you can pull, right? Pull remote versions that have changed to fetch and merge them, right? So fetch would just be, look, I'm safe, I'm checking it out. Pull is, I'm just taking on the whole update, okay? Why does this matter? Git doesn't just give you checkpoints for the way that you develop your system and your context operating system. Git gives you checkpoints so that you can actually manage work like a Kanban board. So Git also has projects, and you can do this same process with projects to be like, great, Git campaign 1, right? Git campaign 1, update 1, right? So on and so forth. And you have a perfect manifest of exactly what is happening. And your team members can visually see it travel across via labels across your project. That's Git. Very important. Let Claude do all the work with it. Now, we've covered the basics. Now I want to start getting into the actual nitty gritties of how Claude Code works, okay? So once you've set this up, you're going to create a .env file, okay? So let's go to a random env now, and let's ignore some of these concepts here. I'm in a random folder, okay? So I'm in everything CC. I set things up as a mono repo. And this is so I can see everything all at once. And so all that means, all a mono repo means is that you have a parent repo, right? And then you have a bunch of things branching off of it. And this is why Git is important, because I don't want all of these systems and projects in my one repo. That would make me very confused and sad, because then it's a messy feedback loop. You change one thing, you change another, you can never version control, right? So instead, what you do is you ignore everything. You use that git ignore function. You say, Claude, git ignore this. I don't want this showing up. And basically every folder on here, other than the ones that are grouped like CLI, right? All the CLIs I've made, all the integrations, you can think of them as, right? Custom integrations. All of those are in their own GitHub repositories under their own version controls, in their own feedback loop with their own operating procedures, okay? And so go to your .claude, right? And make sure you make your .claude. And if you don't have one yet, just write /init, a command inside of your Claude code, and it will set things up for you. Inside of your .claude, all you're going to do is create a new file, and you're going to call it .env. This is your environment variables. This is where you put your API keys. Think of any tool you can possibly imagine and throw it in there if you use it on the day-to-day. The first tool I would recommend throwing in there is Fireflies, or whatever your meeting recorder is. So I'll eventually throw my Fireflies in here off camera, and then we'll go through building our own integration to get Fireflies transcripts inside of our Claude code, because that's one of the best sources of truth for company information, for the pain points that your target market has. And being able to go through them every day gives you everything from content ideas to ideas for improving systems and everything in between. And the second thing you're going to want to be using inside of the companion repo is the session log review tool, which will let you go back and review your sessions with Claude Code and make improvements over time. Now, let's go back to actually covering everything that is inside of Claude Code. So we've gone through setting up Cursor, setting up Claude Code, how to run inside Claude Code, how Git works, getting your environment variables directly inside of there is new. But what is an environment variable? Well, you can see here's something called an API key. An API key is basically what the internet runs on, okay? So if you weren't familiar, if we go back to this article here, every single thing I click on this page, you can see here populating something happening. So if I hit right, you can see GraphQL, fetch, reload, CLR. All of these things are simply a program asking another program to do something, okay? And so the beauty of Claude Code is you don't actually need to know much more beyond plain language breakdowns of how these things work because it will take care of the rest for you. But it's good to understand how they interact. So all an API key is your authorization to get a program to do a thing for you in action. Now, the more API endpoints, endpoint being things a program to do, the more things that program can do. So if you want a CRM to generate a report, it has to have an endpoint to generate a report. Now, if you get very clever, like we did with the Clay CLI or the Clay API, we were able to build our own Clay integration by looking at what happens behind the scenes and using a login as our authority to take actions behind the scenes inside of Clay. You can map basically any software with custom endpoints you wish by just doing this F12 thing. Check terms of service. This is not at all legal advice, okay? I have no idea if you're supposed to be doing that stuff. Now, if we come back here, once you have your API keys set up, once you have your working folder, you are off to the races. Simply run init inside your folder to make sure you have your .claude and everything is set up. If you're not set up correctly, all you have to do is utilize our setup guide to make sure everything looks good, okay? So once we're done that, you now have a terminal and you can start building things, okay? You are now inside of Claude after probably 10 or 15 minutes and raring to go. And if you are someone that is just starting the video from here, we're starting to get into what I think is the good stuff. Now let's quickly go through some important definitions outside of GitHub. Now, you need to really understand what gets replaced as you go through this system. You're going to have some layers of context and attribution. You have your terminal, and your terminal interacts with files. That's it. They're just files in Markdown. Those files get interacted with by agents, and those agents can do clever things and use tools, right? And then they have an output layer, which is in the form of code, content, campaigns, CSVs, documents, basically whatever you want. The world is your oyster. And so that means most things get replaced, right? You end up having one interface that manages everything. You can do project management through GitHub issues. You can replace your note-taking apps if you really want to pretty easily. There's so many open source versions and open source versions of everything. But more importantly, you no longer have to switch between things and copy paste. It gets whatever is necessary and pushes whatever is necessary as you learn to integrate. And so that means context becomes the moat. Context is just your unique taste in the world, okay? And that taste gets programmed into your Claude MD, which is just who Claude is for you, okay? Who Claude is for you. Your skills, which is what Claude can do, okay? So every skill should be one SOP, basically. And the way you build a skill, the best way for a complex skill that is uniquely you, not just interacting with a tool, is to record yourself doing a task first and then give it the recording, okay? And talk step by step, which is why the fetch transcript skill will be the first skill we build together. And then move on to rules, which is more so heuristics. Rules would be like, store thing, always find a place for a file, or always put Python scripts or scripts into temp folders, right? And then you have things like voice, ICP, and campaigns that get referenced by your skills and your rules, okay? So your skill might have something called an argument in it, which we'll go through later. And that argument will show Claude exactly, that argument will show Claude exactly where it can find where your ICP is. And so an argument is actually pretty darn simple. and we'll quickly run through it here. An argument is basically just a snippet of text, right? My keys, like your API keys, that can be tons of information at the other end in a totally different place that can be added as needed. And a pattern you're going to notice here is that basically every system in Claude Code is meant to help you save context. So that means that Claude Code only has so big of a brain and you can only put so much in it. And so wherever it can, the systems exist to help you make sure that it only gets the little bit it needs until it needs to go deeper. Okay. Now, this is your pre-fights checklist. You should have basically all of this set up at this point. Your Claude MD should be very easy. You can use our getting started repo to really dive into things super, super fast. And you should have a pretty good understanding of Git. Let Git be taken care of by Claude for you, but please just understand that you need to push, pull, create issues, and be careful with merging. Okay. Be careful with merging. So now we can move on to actually putting together our business brain, which is the Claude MD. We're going to go deeper into this in a moment, but the two things you need to understand before we dig into actually like the nitty gritty details of what it looks like is that you probably want to use Karpathy's 4 rules inside of your main building GitHub. And you probably want to have a workspace map, which basically tells Claude, I like to use Python, not, I don't know, what's another like NPM, or I'm on Mac, so I use these system commands, right? And you'll just have to look up the ones for your system, but you want to keep it really lean. Like literally the shorter, the better. And then the only time you want to add to Claude MD is if you encounter consistent issues that you hate by reviewing your session logs, okay? Which is just your interactions with Claude. And then being there creates that beautiful thing called a feedback loop, right? And so those are the only things you need in Claude MD. Make it better over time. This is all you need to have a really good time in Claude and get started. In terms of rules, these are 6 rules that I always have. I want it to give me the file path so I can click it. I hate when it uses just only part of the path, okay? I want it to give me, I want everything to have a place. So temp versus not temp. I want it to tell me what it's thinking, right? Before it does things. But at the same time, when it's doing a thing, I want it to default to action, which sounds like an oxymoron, but trust me, it's 2 different directions, okay? Never delete stuff, only archive, because if it deletes shit, I'm gonna be really upset if it's important, right? Especially if I haven't backed up to GitHub yet. Hooks. Hooks are basically a system that lets you inject information to the model right before it uses a tool or right after, okay? This is important because it lets you do cute little things like getting Mario sounds or Pokemon sounds playing when it finishes a task. It's cool because it lets you protect your API keys from being exposed, right? You can put a protection hook on your environment variables so they can't be read, right? This lets you do hard and fast deterministic rules that get injected right before it uses a tool. And this makes it so that unlike rules, which are just words to an LLM, these are code, okay? And so these can't be broken. Very important. You can screw up their implementation, but they can't be broken. And so you might have a hook that fires to ping you in Slack when a task is complete, depending on the type of task, right? Especially for long-running tasks, this can be deeply, deeply useful, okay? You can also do it to trigger certain automations as needed. Like if you invoke a certain tool, maybe you ignite a cron job, which is just a job that happens on a timer that is scheduled, right? And then you have the knowledge base. And this is for you to set up over time. And this is where our first skill will come into play. We'll fetch some transcripts to throw it into the knowledge base. I would recommend just meticulously talking to Claude and telling it about your business to set this up. I can't stress this enough. Your point of view is the most important thing to program into your company's knowledge base, okay? And then just ask Claude to suggest skills based on the work you do, okay? I'm going to show skills that I use that I think are day-to-day. I'm going to show systems that I use day-to-day. I'm going to build things with you that I think are relevant to go-to-market engineers and growth marketers. All of this is transferable over to any type of marketing, okay? Ads, you name it. And so once you have that in place, you're going to be able to enter what I like to call a daily rhythm, which is if you have and you operate through GitHub as your main project management tool, you're actually going to be able to use GitHub as your source of truth on what to do next. And so for my team, what we're rolling out is GitHub issues, making it so that we can run campaigns back and forth. So I can make a strategy, everything goes into GitHub, it gets marked as an issue that says the next stage that it should enter, right? Kind of makes sense. So you can create work pipelines through Claude Code. So your human-led agents can go back and forth. But the important thing is, it also makes it much easier to start introducing autonomous agents through something like Hermes or OpenClaw. Now, let's get into building skills. So the anatomy of a skill is important to understand before we build. We have front matter, which is the name, the model, the description, and the tools it has access to. This is what the AI can read before choosing to go in and look at the skill. And this is important because You want AI to be able to find the skills when you need them. The beauty of skills is that with trigger words, they are triggerable with plain language. If I say generate cold email, write outbound copy, build sequences, right? It knows that it needs to invoke this skill, right? If I say model Sonnet, it knows that the subagent to use this skill is to be Sonnet, right? We'll get deeper into subagents momentarily as well. And so this makes it so I can find the right skill without getting too much info that clogs its context, and loads context sequentially, which basically means, look, you don't want your boss telling you how to do, you don't want to be going over how to change a diaper, right? I'm thinking about having kids soon. So this is why it comes to mind. You don't want to be going over how to figure out, a daycare for your kid before you've learned how to change a diaper. Okay. Terrible freaking analogy, but you get the gist of it. It's not important, right? You want to focus on what's important now. And that's exactly what you want AI to do. Then it'll go through a workflow. And so that's why you should record yourself, because there's so many incremental steps that go into executing a task and so many little things that you don't even think of. You want to get all of those little things documented. And so recording yourself doing it is the best way to make sure that happens. And then you want quality gates and anti-patterns. So you want to have a check at the end that goes over what good looks like. And those are just examples, okay? And so you can think of a skill as a prompt with front matter. That's it. It's a prompt with front matter. And sometimes it's a sequential prompt with front, okay? And that's kind of like a workflow. As you chain skills together, you want the skill output to feed the next skill. And anytime you want to create a chain of skills in Claude, a workflow, an AI workflow, make sure you get to look at GSD, because GSD builds its workflows with user experience in mind. So when you build a skill, be like, yo, you need to ask the user this. Invoke ask user question tool in order to get the right context to do this, okay? You are now inside of Claude after probably 10 or 15 minutes and raring to go. And if you are someone that is just starting the video from here, we're starting to get into what I think is the good stuff. Now, what's the architecture? You've probably heard a lot about MCPs. All an MCP is a way for AI to use something. So we just learned about those APIs, those authorizations, right? So an AI model needs a specific type of language in order to efficiently make something happen, okay? So if I want my sign up button to be clicked, right? I need to give the model context, right? On how to make this action take place, okay? And so MCPs are out of the box toolkits that let an AI understand how to hit a nail with a hammer, right? Let an AI understand how to, let's say, fetch a transcript, right? Go grab a transcript and look at it from Fireflies, right? Basically, I like to think of these as training wheels. So if you look at the companion, there's almost no MCP servers. However, there is a trade-off by not using MCP. MCP floods you in the model with context. So the issue with MCP, if we look at that kind of diagram we were just drawing there, is that all of those tools, right, are always in the model, like we discussed a little bit earlier. That means the model gets overwhelmed, okay? It's got too much going on and it starts to make mistakes, okay? I think that's important to cover because the integration element is what makes Claude Code so useful as a growth marketer. If we didn't have this, it would be almost useless. We would just be shoving data into it, shoving data out of it. It would be an analyst. That's it, right? It would be an analyst and it can, pick apart a CSV and, make a chart, right? But you'd be dragging and dropping, copying and pasting, right? So instead, what we use, again, unless you care like more about security over your API keys as a business, right? But for small businesses, not enterprises, not people that are trying to be SOC2 compliant, you're almost always going to want to use a CLI. A CLI is your own custom command line interface. What is a command line? It's that beautiful terminal we were looking at before, okay? So a command line is this, right? It's got GSD, it's got these beautiful little graphics, it's got a little text box. Inside of Claude Code, you get this nice status bar that tells you about your context. You get a bunch of commands, right? And so a command line interface is exactly what Claude is. It lets your computer interact with a tool. Now, the difference here is that Claude Code gets its name for a reason. It's really good at coding. And so if you make a command line interface, like the ones you can find for free on our website at leadgrow.ai/Claude Code, completely open source for you to use. And inside the example repo, you could get leads from AIArc. You could get target accounts from Disco-like. And it understands those API calls happening in the background and is able to use them when it needs them. That's the important part. Now, this will take us into eventually talking about how does an AI know to use something when it needs it, which is going to be something called YAML front matter, which you can think of it as the headline of something, right? That one line snippet that tells you what a movie is about, right? Like if we go and look at Fight Club description, of course it's going to say nothing because you shouldn't say anything about Fight Club. Oh no, it actually says something. Unbelievable. What's the first rule? What is the first rule? Anyway, so that's going to give you the opportunity to actually interact with tools. Below tools, right? These tools that you interact with are skills. Now, skills are made from your unique context. Let's look at an example skill somewhere, let's say inside of GSD. Now, GSD has planning skills. It has, we might run into a problem here. So GSD runs off of plugins. So that's not going to be a good example. May as well cover plugins now. Plugins are just packages of skills all set up in a nice, neat little box that can be installed in one line instead of many. So this is a bad skill example. Let's go to GTM orchestrator and let's go to our .Claude where skills reside, right? Because we want Claude to be able to see them and know where they are all the time. And we'll go into skills and we'll go to, let's do Reddit find list builder. So at the top of Reddit find, we have build lead lists from Reddit communities by finding people posting buying signals, hiring threads, recommendation requests, and pain points using the Reddit find Python tool. So we have a name and we have a description, okay? And this tells our model what's going on in this tool. The key here is that you want to have trigger words, hiring threads, recommendation requests, pain posts, build lead lists, Reddit communities, finding people posting, buying signals, right? So those types of words that you would say when you have intent towards doing an action, this could be improved. This is a pretty weak skill, okay? Inside of the GitHub repository, you'll have a skill creation skill that you'll be able to use out of the box to help you in building skills very quickly. When you build a skill, I would recommend being extremely meticulous with how you go about it for skills that you're going to use a lot. The way that you improve a skill over time is typically by using your session log review tool. So if I were to come over to Spider Setup and I were to say, let's do a handoff, first of all, because if you have context over 80%, you're going to start making the model confused because just like the MCP, it gets very overwhelmed. And so what you're going to do is you're going to ask the model to make a handoff. Let's hand off this work. And actually in the handoff, what we're going to do is we're going to do a review to find gaps in the Spider setup and the Spider CLI and the Spider skill that can be improved over time, looking at things like anti-patterns and trigger words, as well as its core operating procedures to make sure we don't encounter the same mistakes again. Again, we'll be using the session log review tool and we'll fire that off. Now in the background, that's going to be going through and putting together an MD file. Once we have the MD file, we're going to do man's best friend, which is to go ahead and clear the context from here. Clearing context is the number one command you should be doing because when you start from zero, you have your empty slate and you can actually just use the model to the best of its capabilities, okay? So as it goes through this and it crunches through all of the information that we went through inside of this initial Spider setup and Spider conversation that I had where I created a scraping CLI that uses a waterfall, right? So now Claude doesn't just use, a bright data proxy to scrape Joe Schmo's auto shop. Claude's actually going to go through and utilize a weaker scraping model and then graduate to stronger ones over time. And so it's going to give a session review log off the rip, and it's going to outline system improvements in the confines of a handoff. And so I can use /clear to get out of here, clearing context, but because I had a handoff, I can pick things back up where I was. And so I can say, let's work on these system improvements. Please let me know if you have any questions before proceeding. If you feel like this is a big enough task, feel free to invoke a GSD milestone, okay? And so by saying that and utilizing GSD, which we can get into now, I'm giving Claude a context layer. You can see how we got there nicely. So skills, right? Do a thing, a standard operating procedure. And now we're moving on to our context layer, okay? So we have our skills, we have our context, and we have our file system, okay? Now, Inside of your context are the things that only you know, okay? This is your raw stuff that helps inform how skills and agents are created inside Claude, right? Below that, we just have our file system. This is just everything that lives in your files across the board. Your job is to harness these different layers, right? The architecture into different projects. Now, the projects I would recommend setting up off the rip are these. You want to have a building place, which is your head repo, like the one I showed you. You want to have company information, right? And you information, okay? Who you are, how you work. And you want to have projects and integrations, okay? Over here. And then finally, you want to have things like client work or dedicated areas to do things like analytics. Now, the beauty of this is that you can keep control over each of these individual entities inside of GitHub. So I can control that I have a disco-like system, right? To find companies. This control is important because if you have control over that context, you never have pollution across systems, right? You never end up with your marketing copy and your sales copy, for instance, right? You never end up with your Salesforce analytics mixing with your Google analytics, for instance, by accident, right? Now you might be saying, well, that sucks. I'd rather have everything together. And that's totally fair. What I'm going to say to you is that instead of having everything together, you can unite things as needed using something called an argument. Now, an argument's a fun one. I think it's easiest if I just show you how it works inside of a document. Okay. So let's say you have those separated systems, right? So we had like one system here, one system here, one system here. Let's say all of them need your company context, company MD. Okay. And I should go over what an MD is. An MD is a document that is easy to read for AI. Okay. That's it. That's all you need to know. So you have your contexts all over here and they're all like, I want company information for my Google ads. I want company information for my cold email. I want company information for this. Arguments. So as long as you're invoking inside of a mono repo, because your Claude sits in your file system, it can go across repos for context as needed. And so an argument just looks like this. Company pain points. Okay. And when Claude sees this, right, it knows that it's actually hiding something important. Okay, behind the scenes. Another argument that's really important is arguments for your API keys. That's why we give them names in the environment variables. So we say Bison API key. And this makes it so Claude never leaks your API keys somewhere. It actually can't see them if it uses arguments, especially if you set up a hook. What is a hook? A hook lets you inject a prompt, words, tokens, right, into your system before or after it uses a tool. Now, you remember what tools are, right? Tools can be anything from searching, grep is what it's called in coding jargon, to web search, which is not local search, but online, to creating a campaign, to updating a CRM record. It can be any of those. And so you might have a hook on update CRM record that says, check DB, right? Check our HubSpot DB for record match, right? And this way it never spuriously creates a hook that is irrelevant, right? And then you might have a hook, which is the one I would recommend you set up right away. That is protect environment, protect.env. And so this is what will happen. A AI model will be like, I want to go look at env. And what's going to happen is the hook is going to go, absolutely not, and block it, okay? And that makes it so that your API keys don't end up in session logs that could be shared with Anthropic or whatever model provider you're using. But more importantly, don't accidentally just show up in your chat when you're recording a video like I am right now. And it goes wrong sometimes. Hopefully I don't leak anything, but it's usually pretty darn good, okay? So that's what a hook is. That's what an argument is. And it lets you tie things together. The best hook I would recommend setting up off the rip is actually just a hook that covers that gives you an alert in your ear, right? Like a sound ping when a task finishes or needs your assistance. And I just did like a Pokemon healing noise, like from Mario. Basically, any 16-bit, 24-bit, 16 or 32-bit noise, it can do really, really well. Any jingle, okay? So now let's talk about skills, okay? And then we'll talk about agents. And then you guys basically have everything you need to know other than Claude MD and rules to rip in Claude, okay? So Claude MD, what do you need to know about Claude MD? I stole my Claude MD verbatim from Andre Karpathy, and you're going to be able to find that in here. You're also going to be able to find something called caveman mode, which will save you a bunch a bunch of tokens, okay? So a good source of truth in general is Andrej Karpathy. By the way, you'll get all the slides here as well at the bottom, so you can check those out. But a good source of truth for anything is the godfather of AI, Andrej Karpathy. So let's go look at my baseline Claude MD, and it's very simple. Don't use init, please. So my Claude MD understands some very simple things, okay? And you can see this thing's having some issues right now. String error, It's going to figure it out. That's the beauty of it. You can see it's been running for ages, just doing its thing, checking our required environment variables, not leaking. That's good. So I'm going to preview this to make it less ugly so we can review it a bit better. My Claude MD says very simple stuff. It says, this is my workspace. Think before coding. Simplicity, basically think before acting. Be simple, not complex. Make surgical changes. Be goal-driven in your execution. Basically, don't just make features to make features. We want features to aid in verifiable goals, right? So that verifiable goal could be bringing your CRM work directly inside the terminal, right? And so below that, I have a couple main rules that I think are important, which is we always want to do testing before we ship. We always want to do an agent-first mentality, which is we're going to get into. An agent-first mentality. It explains our runtime, right? So we use mostly Python in the languages we use. It explains that we deployed in main, not master, which doesn't really matter that much, honestly, could probably be removed. Which, by the way, number one thing, as you plan out a skill or a workflow of skills and how to chain together skills, is going to be having a mermaid diagram. We'll cover that a bit more later. So how do agents work? So an agent, you're going to see on your screen here, is going to be spawned when I request it. So I'm going to say, hey man, I'm doing a demo right now, and I just want you to spawn 3 sub-agents in order to go execute on this final check of this task. So for each area, spawn 1 sub-agent to go check it out. Inside of my Claude MD, you may have noticed something called Smart Searcher. So agents are basically, there you go, spawning all 3 in parallel. Awesome. And you can see 2 shells, and you can see, bash, blah, blah, blah. Basically, what an agent is it lets you have an org chart inside of Claude, okay? So you've got head honcho, smart guy, Opus, big, powerful model. You might have an agent that's dedicated to searching, another agent that's dedicated to writing, another agent that's dedicated to searching locally, and another agent that's dedicated to checking the lead list. All of these can come together and work around a single source of truth that the orchestrator reviews and validates against your project goal, okay? I hope that wasn't too complex. All of these guys can work together to make a task happen faster. But importantly, when you create an agent, you can basically say that this agent is only good at searching, Smart Searcher. More importantly, it lets you control spend, okay? Bigger models spend more. If you're just searching for something, use Haiku. If you're just, or DeepSeek V4, Flash, right? Use a weak model. If you're writing, you probably don't need a ton of reasoning, right? You want to be creative, not logical, right? If you're distilling data, if you're running a tool, you can probably use a weak model because it's laid out. You run it the same way every time. It's deterministic, right? So just map out and test things that work for you, but you'll never run out of context window basically on a Claude Code Max plan doing marketing work, less so like building and coding, if you're smart about orchestrating sub-agents. Now, I would say agents are something you should mostly ignore and just focus on skills. All I would say is that you want to have an agent that knows how to search your code base and an agent that's dedicated to the rules of writing, right? Whenever we write, we want to spawn a Sonnet 4.5 agent because it's just better at writing. Now, in the background, you can see that this has been absolutely flying and I accidentally canceled the task. Oh, no, I did. And you can see it spawned the 3 sub-agents, agent 1, agent 2, agent 3, all in parallel. And they each had their own context windows, 29K, 30K, 29K, that did not fill up our orchestrator's window, which they're the ones that's keeping the core context of the goal, the vision. This is really important because it lets you create work, make work happen faster and more accurately, okay? So now we have covered Claude MD, setting up, agents, skills, GitHub CLI, version controlling things. And I'm going to say, let's make a pull request for this to be approved. Great. And it's going to run around and do that. Now, let's get into actually building our first skill to show you just how powerful these systems can be. I've already set up a Firefly skill, but what I'm going to do is say for the sake of a demo, we can ignore the fact that I already have it set up. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is just open up a new window. And ideally, you wouldn't want such a simple skill to exist just inside of like its own project. But in the case of this, right, before we get into like more complex projects, we're probably just going to go YOLO mode because it's very simple. But the one thing I'm going to give you as a tip is turning on explanatory outputs. Okay. So Claude YOLO, we're going to just do it in YOLO. And in fact, we're not going to use Opus. So I'm going to say use Sonnet. Okay. So it's going to invoke Sonnet as the lead model here. And I'm going to say / explanatory mode. Verbose / Claude update config. I don't want to show my config though. Okay. So if you ever want to update things, just go to / update config. But for now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, let's just switch to explanatory mode only for this session, please. And the reason I'm going to tell it to do that as we switch back to planning is because I want you guys to be using explanatory mode, normal mode. No, explanatory mode, please. The reason I'm doing that, and it might not even work, to be honest, I never switch back and forth. You usually have to do it in the settings config. The reason I want to do this is because explanatory mode, it consumes more tokens, but the only way you can learn genuinely about how to execute on these systems, so funny, it's because I put in plan mode, so we'll exit that. Put this in explanatory mode, so Claude explanatory mode, please. And you can run into issues with AI like this where you just like slip up. But the reason you want explanatory mode is because the only way to really get the hang of Claude Code is to have it talk to you and help you understand things over time. And so, yeah, great. Okay, it understands, good. So what we're going to do here is build our first skill and our first integration, okay? And so this is going to be a simple integration that just requires an API key. Go to your whatever meeting recorder you use and just grab the API key and put it in your .env, like we said at the start of the video. And what I want you to do is actually, oh, that's so funny. I just say stop caveman here. It's telling me to stop caveman. Great. And what I want you to do is pop it in an env. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go over to grab the documentation, okay? So as we go through this process, right, everything gets replaced. We're going to start with note-taking apps, okay? So we don't need to go to our Fireflies anymore. So I'm going to just do Fireflies documentation, okay? And all you're going to do, it's going to be the easiest thing you've ever seen, okay, is you're going to go through the documentation and you're going to say, docs, MCP server, don't do the MCP server, please. General examples, ASFRED, MCP. Can you just show me the endpoints, bro? Overview, quick start, core aspects, make your first request. Great. Authorization, great. Fireflies, integration. So it's going to teach me how to get my Fireflies API, how to authorize a request, so on and so forth. And so I'm just going to say, I want the docs. So I'm going to say, I can't believe how hard it is to find these inside this documentation. API, overview, API rate limits, real-time API, make your first foundational guide, GraphQL, schema and types, quick start. So this is so annoying to go through that I'm literally just going to say, here we go, query. Okay, active meetings, great. GraphQL API, awesome. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Google Doc, right? Doc.new. And if it doesn't have like what I need to be able to get the information I require in Markdown, right? Because I can copy the page, but oh, great, view as Markdown. Never mind. So it lets me view the page as Markdown. That's fantastic. So if it has this, then you can just grab the pages Markdown off the rip. And so it doesn't actually matter if you do that. Instead, I'm just going to copy the page. I'm going to throw it in a Google Doc. And so if we go through this GraphQL, we can see that there's queries, there's analytics, there's AI apps, there's channels, there's users, there's transcripts. And so the transcript query is designed to get information from a query ID, right? The AI apps query is designed for XYZ, right? And so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Instead, I'm going to say, hey, dude, Fireflies, right, off the rip, has a GraphQL API, right? So we'll open up this, right? So this is Fireflies, and I know we've already set up a Fireflies fetch transcript skill, but for the sake of a demo, I'm going to build a skill live with the people watching this video and going through a course with me. So let's start from scratch. Let's check out their GraphQL API documentation. And what I want us to do is figure out a very simple system architecture that you can turn into a mermaid diagram, okay? So the system architecture is this. I want to be able to finish a meeting, right? And I want to be able to process that transcript across 3 vectors, okay? The first vector is internal team calls, okay? The second vector and frame that we want to process things through is from a sales point of view. And the third frame we want to process things through is from the frame of content ideas, right? Unique things we said, okay? So that means that this is going to be a multifaceted skill with different reference files for different pathways, depending on the type of transcript it is. So we need to classify the call type off the rip using the skill. And then we need to direct it to the correct location, with content being something that always gets called and the other two being optional. And then, you know what, why don't we have fun with this? And let's actually make sure the sales one is a sales coach, okay? So we don't need to go through to proposal here. Instead, let's coach ourselves on sales calls using the best practices of Hormozi. And so that means that we're going to use the YouTube fetch skill to get some YouTube content from him. So let's go find it. Awesome. So it's going to get started on planning that. And let's make sure we put it in plan mode, okay? Very important, always put it in plan mode. And it will recommend if it requires additional context as it goes. So let's go to YouTube and let's go ahead and grab a Alex Hormozi sales video, okay? And I'll give away this skill at the end of the video, okay? Wonderful. Ultimate sales training, how to sell better, sales multipliers, closers, my best sales tactic, sales hard way, sales 101. And so what I'm going to say is that I want to take this video, keep opening the wrong window, and I want to take this video, okay? And so here's the reference YouTube videos that we can fetch for Hormozi. And what I want us to do is spawn a subagent for each video to grab the videos and review the transcript in from the frame of a multi-stage skill workflow, okay? And so that means we need to think about the inputs for the skill as well as the outputs, okay? So the first step is going to be to coach us on all of the things that we did well, right? From the point of view of a discovery call, okay? The second one is we're going to have to subclassify each of the transcripts as discovery or proposal calls. And I want to classify the transcripts from the point of view of what went well for both types of calls. So for the proposal call, we should be focused on, you know, how we get objection handled, how we move towards the close, et cetera. And then for the discovery call, we should be more so focused on the way we were able to open up gaps, surface pain points, surface high value pain points, and connecting them to the core outcomes of our service. Now, this is becoming a pretty big project, so we can probably use a GSD system. And I would like you to invoke the grill me skill to make sure that you don't miss any core context as you go through this. Now we're going to let that finish in the background. And in the meantime, we're also going to get started on our first integration. We're just diving right into things at this point. So like I said, an integration is something that lets us interact with the software, but interact with it in a more universal level, right? Fireflies is too simple. We want to build an Apify integration. So I'm going to repeat the exact same process I just showed you. I'm going to provide the documentation, right? In this case, I'm probably going to download it fully or take screenshots. Screenshots are your best friend. If you want to put a screenshot directly into Claude Code, you need to go to your screenshots folder and drag it or copy as path. You can't just Control V an image into a terminal, okay? So in this case, we're going to use the CLI anything, right? Repo. If you ever need a repo for anything, just look it up, right? If I want to turn something into a CLI, I'm going to go make a CLI GitHub. And I'm sure something, right? Making all software CLI anything. There it is, right? And you'll find a GitHub with a reasonable amount of stars that you can use to go ahead and create your own integrations, right? A lot of people you follow are going to have integrations and skills out of the box. I'd like to take this moment to just say, you probably don't want those. Skills and integrations that are made by other people aren't going to follow your unique taste and way of doing things. Whenever you create a skill, point it towards GSD to make sure it has a good user experience, okay? And so the last thing I'm actually going to say inside of this skill, which good habit, rename your terminals, Fireflies transcript fetcher, is we want to go ahead and actually give it the core context that we really just want to make sure that it has a good user experience. So I'm going to say, look, the final thing here is we want to create these skills with user experience in mind. So think of moments where there should be checkpoints for the user to review your process, to make sure you pull the right transcript, to make sure that you service the right context and do the right coaching, so on and so forth. And, you know, if we want to draw in context about that company, doing the right web searches and making the right suggestions so that the user can get the most out of it. Because what if you were to reference a client's company as the context and then the evaluation process just sucks, right? And so I'm going to send that and let it continue planning, and then it's going to grill me. And I'm not going to take you through the grill me process step by step. Instead, I'll show you the outcome of the grill me process because it's just going to ask me all the questions in the world. The thing you want to remember is that a perfect plan creates a perfect output. Spend 80% of your time planning any system, okay? And so now we can come back to the CLI anything demo, right? And we can start working on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab those API docs. All right, now let's dig into the terminal and actually explain things as we go. So all we've done here to get you caught up is we wanted to get into explanatory mode, because the best way to use AI as a beginner is to have it explain what it's doing to you so you can understand what you don't like and what you do like. And also, this is exactly how I learned how to use it myself. All these concepts, everything I just read, right? I read a lot of like crazy people on Twitter, man. Like some of these guys are kind of nuts. Anyway, so in the background, by the way, just to show like how much can be going on all at once, I have campaigns being built here, campaigns being built here. 3 shells and sub agents are running on this to build out this list to turn raw government data into company domains, into lead lists in order for us to send to through BBB, through scraping agents, so on and so forth. I have a YouTube video being edited with whiteboard illustrations directly inside the terminal. I have custom lead magnets being created, which I'll show you an example of how good of lead magnets you can create directly inside Claude Code right here. And so I'm creating hundreds of these in bulk right now, lead magnets that look just like this on behalf of one of my clients. And that's because I understand how to integrate things into Claude Code and run them at scale with agent orchestration, right? Very, very simple. Once you get the hang of the principles I'm showing you in this video. So to get back on topic, building the transcript fetcher. So to get you caught up, we were in explanatory mode. I stopped Caveman, which saves tokens, and I've given it the Fireflies API docs. That's the easiest way to do it, to be honest, for the most part. You can also copy the page, okay? Most pages now will have this thing called copy or view as markdown and copy. You can just copy it as markdown off the rip. I would recommend throwing everything in a Google Doc and then organizing the Google Doc by what the query does if Claude is having a hard time gathering the correct context. Before you do that, you're going to want to say, great, here's the workflow, right? So I've described the workflow. We want to be able to go through internal team calls. We want to go through sales calls. And we want to turn things into content. Those are the 3 vectors of what I want this skill to be able to do based on the transcript data. And so I want it to be able to get the transcripts after they happen and then process them. And then eventually, once I have a skill that I'm very happy with, we can deploy it into the cloud and have it run autonomously, right? No reason not to. We could say every 24 hours, check for all the transcripts, process them, and notify me about what you found, okay? The other thing I said is like, hey, why don't we look at an expert and try to clone his thinking? Because I think Alex Ramosi is a beast at sales. So I went and I fetched 2 YouTube videos, and they're literally just videos of Alex Ramosi. And all I used in there is the YouTube transcript skill GitHub, right? And if you ever need something, just do blank, blank skill GitHub, right? So we have a YouTube transcript API, we have a YouTube transcript skill. And so these skills will walk you through the setup in order to use this stuff. But 2 of the best skills you can have is the Reddit fetch skill, which you can find on our website over here, being able to interact with Reddit data to understand how your buyers think. The YouTube fetch skill to get context from experts. As well as the ability to just scrape data with something like Spider or something local like a Playwright server, okay? Spider being a scraping tool. And so once you have all that, you just outline what you're thinking, right? Like, hey, I want us to do is spawn a sub agent for each video. And so you can see here that it had a sub agent here and a sub agent here that both loaded skills through tool uses. And now it's using something called the grill me skill to figure out gaps in my plan. And so if you invoke this grill me skill whenever you create a skill, right? It's going to use the create skill because I said create a skill and that's the trigger word. And then I said grill me, ask me questions about it, right? It'll invoke grill me. And so now it's like, let's name the skill. And so it's giving me suggestions. And this is through their ask user question tool. And so I'm gonna be like, yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. And so this is a good opportunity to explain how subagents work. Basically what each of these subagents are doing behind the scenes, fetches 5 most recent transcripts, asks past transcript ID. So these are great questions. So it's saying, user must know the idea, fetch it directly, no arg, show recent list. Type something else. So instead of either of these, what I wanted to do is actually go look at the transcripts based on what I said, right? So if I say today, probably don't have to paginate, right? If I say yesterday or last week, or if I say trigger words like the person who is on the call, I want you to be able to utilize the API to surface the right initial list, paginate through it, and locate the correct transcript, okay? And so now I've course corrected, right? Because it's asked me questions. It's surfacing gaps in my thinking because I didn't go through the process of talking about it, scrolling through Fireflies, and coming up with ideas directly. So as this goes through it, it's doing something called spawning subagents because I requested subagents. And so subagents basically look like this. Show the Fireflies meeting data, enough context. Perfect, great. Now it's on the right track. Subagents look something like this. You have a big guy, which is our main window, which right now is Sonnet 4.6. And he's like, yo, you are the transcript man. Yo, you are the API docs man. Yo, you need to research this. Yo, you need to write about this. And it's taking all of their stuff and reviewing it based on your goals, right? And that's the purpose of spawning subagents. You'd have sub-agents that go and invoke tools like web fetch, other ones that go check Reddit, other ones that go check this. And you can make these agents programmatic, or you can kind of just like Claude manage the process based on the skills you have. I honestly think having a lot of sub-agents doesn't make sense for the most part. We're looking at having sub-agents that are dedicated towards individual clients as needed. But at the end of the day, your individual Claude MDs do that work for you. Each project should get its own Claude MD, which means each of these folders should have its own Claude MD. And when I open Claude inside of a folder, for instance, if I were to open Claude inside of the Disco-like CLI, it knows that this is what's going on in this project. It knows that this is the Disco-like CLI. And so it's going to check that Claude MD first. The way checking Claude MDs work is like this. You have your files, right? And then they have sub files, right? And so on and so forth. If I invoke in here, it uses the Claude MD that is closest. So if there's one here, it uses that. If there's one here, it uses that. If there's none, it goes all the way to the top. Okay, great. Python wrapping, B2B discovery. What's built? 17 commands, stacks, click CLI, HTTPX, Pydantic v2, rich tables, respecs. Looks like a functional CLI in active use, not greenfield. You're the best. I love you. After classification, so always ask user to confirm the call type or when it's uncertain. Yeah, let's make it user experience oriented, right? So yeah, let's confirm the call type. And we're going to go back and forth, and it's going to grill me over and over again until we have a sound plan and it can execute. And I'll come back when it's done. Okay. And so we went back and forth using the grill me skill, and you can see here, user answered Claude's questions. User answered Claude's questions. It asked me about the name. It asked me about trigger words. It asked me what it would look like, what type of natural language search would work. It started thinking about how the commands would work as well. Asked me how it can select the right script, where user experience should check into the system, which is like, look, I'm going to do the upfront labor of pre-classifying a script, but I'm going to need the user to confirm the script direction. And so over time, what you can do is program titling into the skills in title frameworks using the session log review to be able to go back and fix where it goes wrong and build in better rules and heuristics to the skill so that eventually you can just run it in YOLO mode, which is obviously where we want to be. And that's when really you can start adding agents that run it themselves into the mix, either through Claude managed agents or something like Hermes. But first, always go back and forth with the skills and anneal them yourself, unless, which we'll cover later, it's annealing, self-improving, annealing, getting better over time, unless it's doing that on a single data point that is a source of truth. Like on your homepage, if you have a certain click-through rate, you can quickly just run a bunch of experiments and see what gets the best click-through rate, right? Now, from there, what I did is it actually used the YouTube fetch skill, and that's why it's so important to go ahead and grab as much data as possible from the videos provided from Alex Hormozi. And it's like, oh, I can't get the other transcript. And I'm like, no, you need the whole transcript. So after like 12 or 13 questions, we're left in this state where we have the transcripts and it's asking questions about how we can go through and improve upon the system. And it's looking for gaps between our service offering and what the transcript is mentioning to make sure there's no confusion between B2C buyers and B2B buyers, for instance. And so it's asking me if it should build reference files now with B2B adaption baked in or keep Hormozi language verbatim. And so what I'm going to say is that next to every Hormozi example, because Hormozi is the king of frameworks and examples. I love his frameworks and examples. Why don't we just keep every Hormozi example, but make a B2B equivalent right next to it? And then what I want you to do is bake in anti-patterns based on the Matthew Pocock, I don't know, it's not coming out right, skill. And from there, we'll have something that's like pretty reinforceable. And then the final thing we really have to plan out here from the point of view of how the skill works is in the form of like workflow. And so we really don't want it to do like a bulk analysis. Instead, I think like if a demo call comes in, it needs to have a reference file for demos. And within the confines of those reference files, it should be thinking about the components of a successful, discovery call. And then for demos or proposals, it should have another one that goes through the components of those types of calls. And what I'll say is that we should have some sort of memory system, maybe an SQLite database in place. By the way, an SQLite database is just a local database that keeps track of things for you. We might want to have that in place so that we can cross-reference discovery calls to proposal calls. That way we're not calling out problems that actually took place in discovery that are taking place in proposal because discovery didn't go well. Does that make sense? Overall, I'm really loving the closer open, the gap framework, peel the onion, 3 things on calls, listen 2 to 1, pain is the pitch. These are all great rules of thumb. And obviously Hormozi is a great sales guy. So I think these are going to be pretty good sources of truth. If you were to pick 4 things in the video that are absolutely irrelevant. Really stress test yourself and drop a subagent. What would they be? And now, this is just a good habit as you go back and forth with building your skill. You want to make sure that you're not just letting the agent run wild, right? You want to actually think against itself. And this is the same idea as with skills having anti-patterns, right? And so an anti-pattern might show up in a copywriting skill as no M dashes, right? Anti-patterns might actually just be all the things that AI tends to do that suck. Like, for instance, you can just tell an AI post is an AI post because it's like, most people, most teams, most blank, most XYZ. It's not this, it's that. That's not just a blank. It's a whole new blah, 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 right? All of those would be anti-patterns that you want to break in. And so it's giving a good direction. It's asking about the verbatim skills. It's looking at the SQLite schema, thinking about it. It's actually very excited about some of these ideas. And these ideas will come to you naturally as you get more familiar with Claude Code. Basically, the things you want to think about from the point of view of any sort of pipeline is a few keywords that you're going to want to say to Claude Code every time. It's observability, wherever you can, durability, and then stateless versus stateful, okay? And we want things to be, I hope I'm not mixing these up, stateful. If I'm wrong, let's explain what that means. Basically, we want to be able to see what's going on. We want to make sure that execution is durable, meaning if it fails halfway through, it can be picked up where it left off, right? And then we want it to be stateful, which goes hand in hand with durable. Basically, pick it up where it left off and it can be paused for as long as you want. That's kind of the big difference there, where durable is like it fails and then goes again. Stateful is like it just sits and it remembers and it waits to go again. And that's where things like trigger dev tend to come in. It's getting confused. So I'm going to say Matthew Pocock is just a skill library. He uses the grill me skill. In this case, his skill writing skill can be invoked. Great. And so we'll pause there and come back. And by the time we're back into things, we'll go through exactly how the skill works on a live example so you can see some outputs. And then we'll move into building our own integrations, building our own campaigns, and really just closing out the rest of the video with live examples that really guide you through the process of building reliable systems, as well as running a reliable system. We'll run my go-to-market orchestrator system. And as a teaser, I'm already thinking we'll do some sort of Jordan Crawford inspired permissionless value campaign. So the plan is going to be to take an Apify actor, because we're going to build the Apify or Apify integration. And then we'll take it all the way through to grabbing hiring data. And then we'll actually not use that hiring data to reach out to people. Instead, we'll take that hiring data and we'll turn it into cards about them and about the job description that we'll use to mix and match different types of job or different types of companies and the types of roles they're hiring for to prospects to deliver them companies they should reach out to for their solutions. Going to be pretty complicated, but Claude Code makes it obscenely easy to do systems like that. Okay. Now, as you exit planning mode and you enter a new build, you're always going to want to do some sort of handoff in order to clear context and get started fresh, right? And one of the cool things about GSD Get Shit Done is it's going to actually ask you how you would like to go about this process. And this is where the inspiration for skill chaining came for me, to have a YOLO mode versus an interactive user experience mode. As you get more familiar with builds and the level of detail and intricacy that go into them, you'll understand where you can be interactive and where you can go YOLO. Now, for a build that has scaffolding in place, such as an integration with a CLI, we have the CLI anything repo, or a skill, you can mostly just go YOLO mode. For a project that is new to you and you don't have a good baseline reference or baseline understanding of the components and the things that can go wrong, you're probably not going to go YOLO mode unless you've taken your plan and have had it analyzed by separate AI back and forth in a conversation before continuing. And so it's going to ask you, do you want to go YOLO? Do you want to be, how granular would you like to be? And you can ask it to go even more granular to make it more accurate, but take longer, right? You can verify each plan before execution. I'm absolutely going to verify between executions. I always do this. I never go fully buck wild. And then it's going to ask you if you want to go for balanced or quality, what models you would like to use. In this case, it's not that complex. It doesn't require a ton of reasoning, in my opinion. So I'm just going to go with Sun. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, after every sales call, this is going to be breathing down my neck. And that's my dream. Absolute dream. So he's going to yap at us because we have our Alex Hormozi sales call skill. And so it's just over here. And for sake of this, I've anonymized the prospect, but this is a real prospect. And I only scored a 3.5 out of 10, which makes sense. I'm pretty lackadaisical when it comes to my sales process, but focusing on a little bit more these days. But yeah, this actually was a closed one. So It's good to know that even in closed one, there's still a huge gap that I can also close myself. And so what this did is it took the call debrief, it did the content ideas. So we have our different channels. We always want to have content ideas. You can see here, discussing the most common agencies that generate calls, but clients can't close them. That is a huge one. And so this skill is definitely something we're going to want to kind of give to people. She came in already closed. Mitchell responded by answering the first question directly. No proof statement. We've done this for X companies. No promise. By the end of close, see exactly how. No plan. Here's what we'll cover. Perfect. So basically it's saying I gave too much ground to the prospect. And as a result, I may have risked the deal, which is probably absolutely true. I think the skill probably went into this call without the context of the first call. And that's because the first call was way before the skill came into existence. But I think that gap will be resolved by having the SQLite database storing the previous call associated with the prospect. And then if I were to build on this system, I would just hook it up to the ADIO CLI at this point and make sure that the data streams directly into ADIO. Pane anchoring, Mitchell references prospect-specific context throughout her warmed inboxes, but these appear reactively, not as deliberate anchors opening each section. I see. So I'm understanding now. Okay. So it's saying that I needed to pull at those pain points off the rip. No name system on the 3 pillars. Okay, what happens a month when I got time that writes 3 components, names them, then let me walk through each of them. Never happened. Okay, so distilling the entire system into three points. So that could be like our copy system: interest, value, connect, right? You open with something that generates interest, either a question or something about them in some way. You provide value, which is usually like a thing you did or a free thing for them. And then you offer to connect around that interest and that value, right? So it's saying I need to 3-pillar the kind of proposal itself. Again, a bit of a different call. Prospect spoke frequently, but she was running the call, not Mitchell. Every section was prospect question, Mitchell answered. No deliberate check-ins between sections. No, does this address what you mentioned earlier? So this thing is absolutely roasting me. I'm gonna have to go back and double check the call transcript because I feel like I did ask for confirmation. I'm a big, does that make sense? Great question. Does that make sense? Right after I answer. So if I was losing the ball on that one, I completely agree. So I think this is a decent baseline, but I think it's missing something. I think it's not quite giving me enough. It focused a little bit too much on the content ideas and content angles, which I think it did a reasonably good job. So I'm gonna be like, yeah, I think the sales coach did an okay job. I was really hoping it would be a little bit more meticulous. And also it probably should have evaluated this as a proposal call. Yeah, bit of a demo, bit of a proposal. It was kind of both back and forth, a bit of a weird one, but yeah, I think it should have evaluated this a little bit more deeply. And I would love if it just gave me like a scorecard of checked boxes that I met, and then things that I didn't meet, and then an actionable list of how to improve those things, you know? Like, I think this is hitting on very Hermosy points, but it's not quite delivering them with the frameworks that actually coach me out of these mistakes. Does that make sense? And we'll see what it comes back with and then wrap up this skill, because I think that'll probably be the last course correction we need, just based on instinct. And there we go. Now the skill is being extremely insightful. So we have our proof promise plan opener, stated promise, status plan, got verbal agreement, pain anchoring, So basically, you're getting them to agree up front, right? Sound good? And now it actually gives you, an example of how you might phrase that. And so I added a future feature flag to the skill to actually put together a clear setup guide for the first time you set it up, which I think you should include in any skill, but actually incorporating real company knowledge, because right now it's not incorporating real company knowledge very well, which is really just a gap in the plan that I gave it in the first place at the end of the day, right? So in this case, it's referencing like fake case studies at the moment, 30 plus agencies. I believe we worked with like 6 SEO, GEO agencies, tends to be one of our best types of customers. Conviction check on this call. For what you've told me, you need consistent qualified, but you don't have bandwidth internally to build it. Does solving that feel like the right priority for your agency right now? Not bad. And based on what we've walked through today, the outreach engine, the offer sharpening, necessary handling, everything, does this look like it would close that gap for you? So huge conviction checks. This is actually a great insight. It's definitely something I don't do. I confirm pain points, but I don't confirm their conviction of the system towards the pain points. One of my favorite things to ask on a call, I wonder if you'll reference here, is just, you're in a dream world. You can have anything you want. What's the one thing missing from this proposal for you to make you, to make it absolutely perfect? And then, I really push them to think about it because it's a healthy habit, not just for one, surfacing if there's any gaps that weren't surfaced during the process, but number two, surfacing areas where maybe I just didn't explain something, right? That's totally happened. They're like, I'm just worried about this. And I'm like, oh, we do that. I didn't explain that very well. I should probably use a freaking script, right? And so this looks fairly actionable. Really tore me a new one, which makes sense. I'm definitely not a sales guy. I overcomplicate things. I get too technical. I get too into the weeds sometimes. The shut up when they say yes is great. I think there are a few things to take care of still, though. You always want to let them know what you're going to do in terms of action items. But I think this is a pretty solid skill now, and I'd be excited for people to check it out and leave some pull requests, which is just, hey, I have a feature idea. I'm going to flag it, right? I'm going to tell Claude to flag the feature like this, add a feature flag to tie in real company knowledge. And it'll create a pull request inside the repository that, hey, I want an update. And then when it's built, you close the request. Or if it's not going to be built, you also close the request. Okay. And so what did we go through there? Well, we went through what it takes to quickly adapt a skill more towards your liking. We went through the process of creating a skill, which is feeding a lot of raw inputs and then distilling it around the areas where you think the inputs would be most relevant. We had to go through the process of categorizing a sales call, pulling a transcript directly from Fireflies, and then making a decision on which transcript is most relevant towards being a sales demo versus a proposal versus et cetera. We wrapped all of that up into a skill. We put it into a repository so it can be version controlled. And now we have a sales coach out the other end. Now, what you could do is take this skill and put it into Claude managed agents as a next step and have it run after every call on its own. You could take this skill and you could put it directly into N8N, which is what I would more so recommend on average. However, the reason you might want it in Claude managed agents is because in managed agents, it would be able to make decisions on things like past clients, right? It would be able to dip into a lot more knowledge on the fly, right? That you may have housed, or you may have housed within the related repo, or you may add as like a database. And you'll be able to mirror and deploy this skill like a lot more quickly to the way it's functioning within your current kind of local setup, right? You could also put it through trigger dev if you needed to have like state control, right? You need to course correct or have a human in the loop in certain aspects of it. Personally, I would probably put it on a local loop, right? I would say something like this. Hey, Claude, I think we should run this skill on a loop every 2 days, or let's go 24 hours to check for calls that could be content, but also check for sales calls and coach me on the sales calls. And then as one final future feature request, I think we should look to get that integrated with the ADIO CLI so we can get everything pushed into ADIO nice and neat. So that when someone goes from a discovery to a demo or a proposal, they have their full gap assessment plus all the things that they missed getting into the call so that they can make sure they clear up those doubts that may be sitting in their prospect's mind because the discovery wasn't thorough enough. And that's really how easy it is. Like, I can't stress enough that once you have the right systems in place, using GSD, using reference material, having YouTube fetch, being able to pull in transcripts and raw data in order to turn really high quality resources. Be careful of what you're using, right? I know I really enjoy Hormozi's sales content and that it's helped me in the past. And therefore I was very confident to take Monda's videos. In general, I would focus on consuming something and taking notes about what really resonated. So you can shove what resonated directly into the plan, and then the skill will prioritize those things. So building your own skill or SOP, record yourself doing it, document all inputs and outputs. Building a skill that is something that you're not great at, find the expert you absolutely love, right? Watch it first. It would be my recommendation in general. But I didn't want to watch an entire 6 hours of sales content here today with you guys. And then push it directly into Claude Code, plan out the skill from there, plan out the actions you want it to take. And basically what you want to do is use systems thinking to define like the steps that should exist. So when I think about a call, I would think about like, well, what kind of call was it? Okay, well, based on what kind of call it was and my business type, like what are the things that matter in terms of pain points? And so over time, I think the way the skill would be improved is just syncing up with your company knowledge, which is why I add the setup flag, and you'd be in a better place to kind of run it at scale with the most value possible. Now let's dig into actually building our own integrations. Now we've already discussed what an MCP is, but really what it is at the end of the day is a USB port for your AI. It can plug into a tool, understand it completely, and then run services through it. Now, instead of using an MCP, we're going to use a CLI, like I mentioned, which is basically the exact same thing, except it's run via code. And that's why coding agents have become so uniquely valuable. The only difference here is that your authentication is almost always going to be authentication through an API key or a login. Okay. So what we're going to do, this is just an example of a connector, the Bison MCP / Bison CLI. This makes it so that you can actually go ahead and pull data from your campaigns. For other growth marketers, what I would recommend is having basically a CLI for anything that houses your analytics, because you will discover things that you never thought possible. And you can start to build loops like the Karpathy loop, which we'll discuss shortly. I will go through a full breakdown of exactly how it works, because it's probably the most powerful skill that you can have from a marketing point of view when you have a controlled variable. Now, within each system, there's basically going to be sub-agent orchestration. And so before we get into this, let's pause and let's kick off building our own integration with Apify. And the cool thing about Apify is that it has so many different tools that you're going to have a ton of commands that can work across one another, asyncly or in sync or together. And we can actually have full agent orchestration happening across a lot of different tool mediums interacting with the same platform, which is why it's important not to just wrap API keys, right, in a script. You actually want to turn it into a CLI so it's properly invocable. Now, Apify already has a CLI, but what we're going to do is we're going to fork it and make our own. If a platform doesn't already have a CLI, but they do have an MCP, I would recommend mapping the endpoints off of the MCP server. So install it short term, right, using one of these snippets. If you need help installing, always just paste into Claude Code. And then use the anything CLI repo that I mentioned before and pull it into your workspace. So give it the repo, and that will walk you through the exact build path. So coming back to Claude here, we're inside of our CLI demo with Apify. And you might be wondering, if there's already an Apify CLI, why are we building our own? Really good question. The reason we want to fork it and change it is because a simple CLI doesn't necessarily have these things wrapped in ways that you would feasibly use them, number one. And there may be a certain set of tools that you want to program well, so you have a baseline and a template for integrating more tools in the future, especially for something like Clay, Apify, Rapid API. These platforms are more of a marketplace of tools. You're going to want to have like a very set motion in place for how you like to interact with it, or it's just going to get lost in the sauce and end up trying to invoke things that don't actually matter. So the first thing I said is, based on the way we operate, I want you to do a diagnostic and break down exactly which areas of this current CLI are irrelevant and come back with context for a plan. And so it's basically saying like, look, we're able to clone certain things, strip local dev time in half. We're going to replace the empty repo with an upstream clone. And it's actually mapping out the command groups that matter and how we're going to rewrite them into our own native language. Because that's a big thing, is that certain CLIs will only run in certain languages. From there, what it's going to do is make a repo root and start working on skill MD files. And this is going to equip the agent with an understanding of how to interact with the tools, right? And so this is actually like a very quick process when you fully plan it out. And it's already made a pretty surprising plan. Run actor, execute actor, get run status, is run done, fetch results, get data set, read KV store, list actors, run task, get info. So it's already got some interesting little phrases here, and the list actors make total sense. And it's even telling us exactly how we have to go about getting set up and preparing for the install. And so what I'm going to say is that out of the box, I want to adjust this plan. And very important, you want to adjust it to your workflows. So I'm going to say that out of the box here, Claude, what we want to do is have skills wrapping around very specific types of API-Fi actors that we tend to use. And what I want to remove fully, other than the Discord and the PM, real tongue twister there, and the update doc scripts, what I want to do instead is actually really only focus on the patterns and commands that are for running actors, monitoring actors, and getting data, and completely ignore, just confirming that we're completely ignoring anything that's about building our own actors. And then number two, I actually want us to wrap around individual actors as skills, because individual actors have their own rule sets. And so I want you to either create a system using the Vercel agent browser, which, by the way, I'd recommend everyone download. Free, lets you operate browsers way better than Claude for Chrome, or giving me manual steps. And throughout this, please let me know the manual steps that I should take. And I want you to go through and create skills at the very least for the LinkedIn hiring data actor, right? And really think about how we're going to be preparing that data for integration with our go-to-market orchestrator system. So it's going to need to have some understanding of the pathways certain data should take. And then alternatively, we have to think about what is a data source, like a LinkedIn ad scraper, by the way, for instance, which is the second actor that we can get set up off the rip here. And the difference between something that's more of a data enrichment. And so we're going to need a skill that can discern between the two. One of them tends to take action on pre-existing data, row by row. And the other tends to take action on data in bulk all at once based on some sort of search parameter or page to scrape. Okay. So let's build that into the system and give me a task list of things you need me to do to make sure you can run smooth through this GSD process. And so you can see I'm really giving it a ton of context. And this brings us to a really important skill, which is to let the model actually prompt you. Very important. So what do I mean by that? I mean, I asked the model to tell me exactly what to do. And when we use Grill Me, we're asking the model to assess gaps in our thinking. And so if you both do this back and forth together, you'll fill in a lot of the gaps that go into a lot of these builds and be much more successful at the other end. And so before you start any build, I think the best thing to do is create a mermaid diagram to confirm how it thinks things are going to chain together. And so that's actually something I'm going to do here is I'm going to prompt it to do that and we'll see what it comes up with. And you can see that it gave me a full task list and gave me exactly what I need. And once it creates the mermaid diagram, which you can get mermaid diagrams to work through going to the extension store inside, over here inside of, actually, can I do this? I can over here. And inside of there, if you just look up any extension you need, you can basically grab anyone with a significant number of stars and be pretty confident that it's safe. If you're not confident that it's safe, you can always get Claude to go scan it and make sure it's safe for you. Okay. And that goes for most things. Like just let Claude walk you through how things are supposed to happen, walk you through how the CLI anything repo works, walk you through all these things, and you'll basically be off to the races. And if you don't want to spend Claude tokens on it, you can always invoke DeepSeek, right? DeepSeek will be super cheap. You'll spend 90 times less and you'll get the answers you're looking for. And then you can let Claude focus on the creative work. Now, I'm going to grab this stuff and then we'll get started on the diagram. This is why mermaid diagrams are so helpful. Now we can see our logic for how we expect the skill to behave in a real example to work, right? So we can see that it's going to go through bulk discovery. And then there's an option for it to actually do enrichment through another Apify actor that we use from Harvest API in order to get company employees, titles, emails, and merge into the company record, right? I'm going to make that optional for sure. And that's the feedback I'm going to give it. As we go through this, we can actually see what's going to happen. We have our trigger phrase, we have our API actors run, we have our REST API, so on and so forth. And it's going to go through the actor skill MD. It's going to be asking if it's scheduled or one-off, and it'll follow different pathways depending on what is required, as well as the bulk path versus the enrichment path. We can kind of decide whether or not we just want to get the data or enrich the data through to Google Sheets and then straight into our go-to-market orchestrator as a campaign briefing. So this is what I mean by skill chaining. Now I've taken existing systems, right, that exist over here, and I'm able to make my new CLI and ensure that the skills plug into it natively from the get-go. And this avoids rebuilding. And it's why one of the best things you can get assembled as you start early on is something called like a nexus. And inside of a nexus, you would be putting together basically a web of all the systems you have so that you can actually just send an agent to go look at your existing systems and tell you what's complementary to one another and help you brainstorm the next system you should create without having to start from scratch. After 15 minutes of sauteing, it's basically completely done and shipped everything. And so now we just have to head into actually testing the system. I had to give one slight adjustment on where it ended up storing things, but the good news is it did store things. I like to now concentrate my skills within the CLI they're associated with. And then when I go to build a new workflow, I can always just borrow those skills for usage, or CLI usage, but only borrow the skills that are necessary for that workflow. So that workspace is never bloated. That you can almost call it like your own apps, right? Like you're kind of concentrating app spaces and knowledge spaces and then building spaces, if that makes sense. And so we have our handoff. We're going to make sure it executes the move. We're actually going to exit now because we're completely done the planning phase. And I'm going to say use Sonnet. Or actually, you know what? Let's finish it off by using DeepSeek so you guys can see DeepSeek. Use DeepSeek. There we go. And so you can see here, now we're deploying Claude Code with DeepSeek. So I can show this as an example. And we're going to get it to continue running through this task. When it's done, we'll come back and I'll show you guys the results of the test. This is one of my favorite parts. So this has been going for already 6 minutes. And you can actually see here that it found that direct page scraping was very, very easy when it comes to scraping product hunt. it was able to get 100% accuracy against the initial ground truth, and it's getting 100% recall. Whereas the SERPer keyword queries alone were maxed at 25%. So it knows that the news process needs to be updated to have hybrid architecture, right? Using SERPer dev. So it's going to run, and now it's going to anneal both processes against the ground truth, and it's going to do 5 to 10 passes on its own to improve the system. And if you're building the system in a GitHub, you could tell it to have each of these passes be documented as a version. And so if you ever run into a wall where things get worse, you can always go back to a version that was working better as a reference. So now what we did is we actually started course correcting the system to have a skill that runs it on top. And so what I did is I pulled in the Vercel agent browser via command line interface, not via MCP. And I grabbed the LinkedIn Boolean search documentation and provided it directly to this session. And I said, look, let's use the LinkedIn Boolean search. I even create a search for it. Let's respect LinkedIn rate limits and only do like 1 request per minute to protect my account. And this way you'll be able to create your own Boolean searches, which if you're not familiar with a Boolean search, it's just a search that's programmatic. You can see here like growth or demand or customer acquisition, so on and so forth. And so what it did is it went ahead and it refined the results. It actually checked its results and checked the link and put together a new link, a new and improved link, and showed me, how much junior noise there is in it, what type of changes we could do. And so what I'm going to say is, yeah, go ahead and make these changes and then reply with the link out the other end, plus your next steps. Okay. And let's actually not do the addition of senior titles, but happy to exclude interns and super junior titles, other than specialist, okay? And now it's gonna go back, it's gonna recreate a link, it'll provide it to me. I'll show you guys the link and then we'll finalize the build and we'll actually get data out of it to show you that we now have an Apify CLI that lets us engage with the Apify platform directly from Claude to do whatever we need it to do. This could be, analyzing your CRM data and figuring out who in your CRM is hiring. This could be enriching your CRM using Apify. This could be scraping their socials. This could be checking on your influencer pages and building a system to monitor the influencers that you engage with to see how they're performing and pull that data into your own database, figure out which influencers are the best. The point is that everything I'm showing you here today can be applied across all go-to-market. I'm just showing you examples that happen to be this go-to-market. And so in this case, it's opened the wrong browser, but it's still able to see enough data. And it's got 64,000 results this time, which is pretty insane. And so I might get to change from any time to the last week instead, or the last 24 hours. But you can see it's actually opening the browser and checking the work. And in fact, it doesn't even need a signed in account. So I can actually get it to ignore rate limits in that case. So the Apify integration is totally done. And it's not just a one-time integration. It has a skill to build integrations for any actor that we want on the fly. And it will understand the core architecture of each actor and how you're supposed to engage with it to get an output. And the beauty of Apify is it's actually holding your data for a time. So you have some built-in durability there. But what's really exciting is that you can chain these things together into other skills and other workflows to make it more powerful very quickly. So in this case, what we did is we hooked it up to Clay to grab one of our Clay tables that we just used fetch via the Clay API. And if you don't have the Clay API yet, Brandon Charlson made one that's great. Just check out GitHub B Charlson or his website, Top of Funnel. He's a really, really great builder. And so this lets us fetch things from Clay. And so we fetch those, and now it's blacklisted and added to our Supabase. And this is being pushed to Supabase so we can store the data over time and associate it with other companies that we have in our data set. And you can see we scraped an original 199 jobs for growth roles in the US. And of those jobs, 150 companies were deduped, and we have 119 total job titles. And it pushes straight to a Google Sheet for visibility purposes. And you can see that we get a ton of great data. We're getting their LinkedIn, we're getting their website when it's available, which is pretty freaking awesome and a bit of an upgrade compared to what you might get with even Clay itself. We're getting the company slogan, which is awesome. We're getting the company description. And I would say the only thing we're really missing is the detailed job description, which means that another innovation for this would be to push this data directly into Clay using a fire and wait system from Cloudflare. And basically what that will do is let us push data to a webhook, wait for it, and then pull it back using an API call, right? To extract it from the table. And with that, we could use Clay's inbuilt job description fetcher, which is totally free, right? And so now we have this great data. We'll be using data like this for the campaign we build later in the video, where we'll try to send people companies that are in their target market that are hiring for roles that need things based on the job description related to what they do, basically, in these roles. And so the second thing that we actually put together here is the ad library scraping system. And so I gave it some advice on how we can put together different links and how we can identify, looks like it doubled up countries equals US. So it made a little bit of a mistake here, but how we can identify, country level, how we can identify different keywords in order to surf the ads library. And we could do this both at the keyword level, or we can actually scrape it on a per company basis. So that'll be the next kind of reference file that we add to the skill. And then it'll be pretty universally valuable. We can either start with ads as a signal. Anyone running demo trials, webinars, etc., are going to have different types of signals towards how they're behaving from a marketing or a sales point of view. And then we can use that data in order to inform how we do outreach. Who's actively investing in ads is usually a really good signal that someone's trying to grow. And so if you have any services related to that, which most services I would say are, it can be a great little flag to segment your market through. And so, yeah, now we have a full integration and we can use it on the fly anytime, and a skill to add any other integration. And as a quick recap for you, this is the total process that we just covered over the course of 7 or 8 prompts. We grabbed the CLI anything repo right here. We forked it. We used that repository and we decided on a tool we wanted to integrate that had an API. Very important. It has to have an API or else you can't really communicate with the tool. From there, we used that API, right? And we downloaded, right, the API documentation. Before that, we checked to see if they already had a CLI or an MCP in place. If they do, you can use either of those as a baseline to make your own. And we've made a nice little face here. From there, we start to architect the way we want to use the tool. And this is just communicating with the AI in plain language, okay? So you're just going to go on a yap fest at the AI. And then from there, you want to start thinking about the way the API keys are going to be used for your use cases, right? And the types of business use cases that you have for the system, and make sure they're fed into the model so that when it goes and architects skills for you to use within the confines of the system, those skills are architected and created around the way you like to work with the tool. For me, Apify is something that enriches or finds signal-led data. So we created 2 pathways. One is the signal-led pathway, and one is the enrich pathway. And so it understands anytime it has to create a task from the get-go, how that works. And then finally, at the architecture phase, when you're just planning it out, right? You're putting the AI in plan mode. You've given it the API. You've given it CLI anything. You've given it context about how you want to use it. You want to think about 2 things, and that's where it integrates into in your current systems. So you have something out of the box that is already pre-planned. For me, that was my go-to-market orchestration system where we run campaigns as a business for our clients. And the second thing was making sure it had a good user experience in mind, so that people who use it understand. For any advanced user that's already got the nitty-gritties down of what it is to engage with Claude Code, the Carpathy Loop is the best possible skill for your go-to-market, best possible system. It's created by one of the godfathers of AI at OpenAI. And every time this guy drops any sort of resource, any sort of system, like a side project, entire startups are spawned to compete against it. So that's how good this guy is. And this is stupidly simple, and there's sophistication in its simplicity. You pick one data point and you create a feedback loop where the AI spawns split tests against the current winner, so a challenger, right? And those split tests all compete to beat the benchmark, okay? And that's why it's important to have one data point to work off of. So some examples of this, just off the top of your head, off the top of my head, would be reply rate in cold email. You have a cold email go out, and you have a reply rate benchmarked, and you say, I want to anneal on this reply rate. Now, that's where you run into some problems, because this isn't just like algorithmic. This isn't just research-based like it was developed for. So there is a version of this called auto context, if you want to look it up. I don't personally use that one. I just kind of bent the Carpathy loop to my needs. But the point is that you need to add your own unique taste into the system, okay? So somewhere in here, right, between kind of measure and analyze and update, right, feed pattern into skills, there needs to be context about exactly how you operate and what works, and some rules, okay, around what can be updated. And so taking that example of a reply optimizer, if you want to be optimizing reply rate, you need to think about it from the point of view and only one bastion of truth, which is deliverability. Okay. And you need to have some rules around what can beat a challenger, because deliverability will go down over time naturally. So maybe you set a benchmark that needs to be at least 20% better, right? in order to overtake as the new challenger. And then new split tests will go against this guy, right? And then you run into the problem that, well, this has to happen on a certain time horizon. And so then you're like, oh, okay, well, normally you want a loop to happen in like 5 minutes. That's not going to happen with cold email, right? But you might be able to loop on this across all of your volume campaigns. And you might say you can do it every 1,000 sends, right? Or maybe you go a little lower and you say 500, right? So you're embedding rules that matter towards your system. And then below that, you might say, actually, one thing that we need to be careful of is we don't actually want this to go buck wild and go beyond the goal of deliverability, right? So we need a goal, we need context towards the goal, we need rules, and then we need the exact measurement, right? A definable, simple measurement. It needs to be one data point. Click-through rate, conversion rate on a page, abandoned cart rate, right? You can have a single data point to anneal on. And so we might say that, well, in order for this to actually work, we need to make sure we control certain aspects of what it changes. And so maybe we'll say the call to action / the offer needs to stay the same and leave that with human control. And then we might say, well, my guy, you can't just say, I'm going to give you $1 million, right? That's not going to work, right? And so you can see how the more nuanced the system, the more messy it gets. So the best place to use this is meticulously. And when you start it, you need to create a ground truth for it to measure against. And so for a website, that would be your homepage. For cold email, that would be the original cold email winner. And maybe the loop is only triggered when you notice that the winner starts to go on a downtrend, right? So you have a winner and it starts to go on a downtrend because of something called fingerprinting, right? It's kind of like how ads get stale. And you could do the same loop on ads, right? And you would say, we're not going to touch the creative. We're only going to touch the copy. And among the copy, we have to make sure we stay focused on this value prop, right? Or this benefit. And then we'll have all the benefits lined up with their own creatives and each of them run on our beautiful, beautiful loop. Okay. So that's the loop. And what we're going to use it for today is to build our own go-to-market signal. Okay. And so today, we're going to use the auto research process builder that I put together over here and is part of your course. And so if you just go to Lead Grow AI, Claude Code, and you go to Research Process Builder, this uses the Karpathy loop to create a ground truth and then uses that ground truth on the day for signals in order to test various systems against it, especially when the system is search driven. So using Google search, using SERP. It can also be used, the same principles, in order to discover locations, to find data, and build unique processes like scraping the SEC portal or scraping Clutch or monitoring a certain area for new data, right? So we're going to dive into that. And by the end, we'll have a full process built and I'll show you guys where you can get the data for free. Okay. We're back in Claude Code. And to get you up to speed, what we're going to build is actually just a product hunt scraper for new product releases. And we're going to start with product hunt. Over time, I'll probably add to the system in order to monitor different locations and do it via search, right? But for now, I think the easiest thing is to create our own signal in this manner. And so what this has in place is a PH leaderboard. And so all I did is go to the product hunt leaderboards, which are over here. And I basically just went to launches, right? And I went to their launch archive and I said, let's sort daily. And I said, look, we have some logic up in the UTM parameters that tells us how to get to different pages. And so we'll use that for our scraper. And then it comes over here and it says, oh, look, company info. So we're able to actually grab company info from a second page. And so what I'm going to do is flag that, right? We come over here and we can see that the company info is available on a second page. And I'm going to add another step to be like, look, we should do a comparative analysis to make sure that the company info and the other info, right, is compared against, right, to make sure that it actually is a new feature for us to outreach as a result of, right? So I'm going to pop this in. I'm going to say, hey, okay, awesome. So you got the leaderboard daily, you've got the URL pattern confirmed. It looks like you're in a pretty good spot. And then next to this, what we can do is we can send out, an Opus model to create a ground truth around product launches that aren't happening on Product Hunt and are just happening in the news for startups, maybe from like sources like TechCrunch or something like that. And we can use that to get anything that's not showing up on Product Hunt. And then when it comes to Product Hunt itself, we just need to make sure that we compare the new release, right? Because some of these are totally new products dropping, not just new features. We need to compare the new release to the product itself to make sure that it's actually a feature versus the core product. And then we'll have two streams. One is going to be fully a signal and one is just going to be this new product launched. And there's probably some reasons to reach out as a result of that. Okay. And then the final thing is we're going to have to analyze the actual ground truth and anneal against it using the research process builder. And so I'm going to let that fire away. And what we're going to be able to do is take this data because we get the domain, right? We can see some examples here. They dropped Codex Pets, which is obviously a feature. This is a comics marketplace, which is interesting. We have getsleek.io. And then I'm just going to say, the final thing is that and by the way, we should stop it. The final thing is that we don't actually care if it's only AI related. I would just like to flag that it's AI related as a column. And then once you're ready and you've built everything out, and feel free to leverage Spider Scraper in the confines of this workflow if you need to, because it'll make things simple. Once everything's working and you're happy and it's above like 90% accuracy based on the ground truth data that you've made, we can look to add a quality gate to make sure we get rid of that last 10%. And then we can move directly into launching this system on Trigger Dev so that it's something that runs every day. And then, you know what? Why don't we deploy it to the website so everyone can have access to this data for free? Oh, and you know what? Maybe we should try to scrape the homepage of every single company that we find to see if we can find their LinkedIn. And then from their LinkedIn, we should be able to do a simple enrichment, right? Using regex patterns, do a simple enrichment through AI Arc to get their LinkedIn data or something, okay? And so it's good. It's a healthy habit to really stop a model instead of just dumping more context into it, because you want it to be able to do everything all in one go and really coordinate and orient itself before it starts taking action without you. And so it's saying big pipeline, big vision. And so I'm just going to quickly mention for when it's done to make sure that we use GSD in the planning process. And it's important to note that when you use this system, if you just ask it how the system works, I've programmed it in for anyone that's not intuitively, basically the reason you should always create your own systems and skills is because most people have a lot of intuition that goes into the way they use them. So when you create your own skills, you have that intuition and they work great. But then when someone tries to use your skill, it probably doesn't work that good. So when you create skills as a team and when you look at using skills, you should check to see if user experience is built in. I make sure all of my systems going forward, maybe the Bison CLI doesn't have this in place, but all of my systems have user experience in mind. So if you say, let's lay out the process of Research Process Builder, it'll give you a checklist, and you can actually get it to tell you what it needs from you to do well, right? It removes that intuition aspect. So we're going to let that run. And when we're back, we're going to have our first baseline data set. And then if it looks good and it anneals well, because it's going to do the loop, the Karpathy loop that we discussed, based on the ground truth data it makes from today, we'll take that and we'll see if we can get to above 90%. And then we'll look to deploy it to Trigger Dev, which is going to make it so it runs every day on a cron job as an automation, which gives us a good opportunity to explain when to automate, when to agentically automate, and when to run things on your own. And so it's a really simple hierarchy for me, and let's walk through it. Where should you run your workflows? Should you run in Claude Code? Should you move it over to N8N? Should you move it over to Trigger Dev? In the case of a go-to-market signal, as an example, there isn't much that's happening in terms of tool use that is incredibly complex, but it is not deterministic. Very important. So the moment something isn't deterministic, that is when it stops being a simple automation. The reason I use Trigger Dev over N8N is because it is easy to deploy directly from Claude Code with the Trigger Dev CLI, number one. And number two, it's completely malleable, okay? So let's get into it on when to automate versus agents. So I'm going to draw a hard line in the sand here, and I'm going to say for you that an agent, right, is just AI plus skill plus tools, okay? An automation, okay, on average is just a Merkle tree, which is just like a bracket, like a string of logic. It's if-then statements, okay? And so you can have agentic automations, right? Where you have, an LLM calling a tool here, and then it's deterministic again, right? But what you need to understand is that it's very hard to build a good one of these that does a good job. It's very easy to build a good automation. So why is everyone obsessed with agents? Well, because by being inside Claude Code, you get to build agentic systems that use that Karpathy loop, right? And I say system because without the feedback loop, it's just a tool, but with feedback loops, it's a system. So what you get to do is actually put together a system that can think and improve itself. And that's when you create an agent, okay? Agent equals skill plus tool, ability to improve itself. And it should be for any workflow that requires decision-making that is different each time. And so the best thing to do is give you an example, okay? If a campaign comes back, there's going to be a ton of nuance, right, to what scales a problem with a cold email campaign, right? So this campaign comes back as like red alert, right? What do we do? Well, there's about 100 different things that go into that decision. One is, how are the other campaigns doing, right? Other campaigns, okay? 2, compared to those campaigns, how is this campaign doing, right? 3, compared to those campaigns and these campaigns, what's our point of reference? What's our baseline now for these inboxes or this system? Okay, well, it looks like we're actually good, but we're still getting a bounce issue. Oh, well, if it's a bounce issue, then we need to validate. But then it's like, do we need to validate right now? Wait a minute. Actually, this campaign is Outlook only. Let's compare it to the Google campaign, right? And oh, the Google campaign's doing well. Maybe we should kill the Outlook campaign. But hold on, are there any inboxes performing to the Outlook campaign? Maybe we should go ahead and check if those inboxes that are performing, right? If there are any, and if there are, maybe we just use those inboxes and we mark down what type of inboxes currently deliver to Outlook, right? And then we try to reflect this on all of our other campaigns as an issue, right? Now, if you build anything in N8N, you know that that is a freaking nightmare scenario. Whereas an agent would have all of this deterministic evidence and an understanding of where to go, see multi-step with branching logic, where to go to find things, right? And so at first, you're going to run this in Claude Code and you're going to be able to control it. And then once it gets good, you're going to deploy it to something like Claude Managed Agents, or you can deploy it to TriggerDev, which is great at agentic ones, right? Because of the durability, retriability, and observability, right? Or whatever you want. It's tool agnostic. Whereas N8N stays much more dedicated to those deterministic flows of events, okay? And is able to handle them at scale, at volume, no issue, okay? So start with agent local, graduate to agent in the cloud, use it for highly branching judgment calls that take skill, okay? If it's an SOP, there's a chance that it could be an agent. And then when you get really advanced, the final level is to just throw it on Hermes agent, a dedicated Hermes agent, and let it just monitor it on like a cron job, right? And the beauty of Hermes agent is that it has like a self-improving harness built in, kind of like Carpathy loop. So all your agents just get the same harness, but then also it can spawn sub-agents itself for different things. So if it decides it really needs campaign copy, it can do that. If it decides it needs new leads, right, it can go and start the process of getting new leads. Let's get back into the build.
And just like that, we have our own product launch signal. And so we're tracking, it's not showing up here the best, but at least in Supabase, every category is showing up well. Definitely need to reformat this table, but I threw it up on our website. Still no image here as part of the workflow. And yeah, you can take this stuff as well if you want it. Basically, here's how it works. This is like the full walkthrough, and I'll actually throw this README in the repo as well if you guys want to rebuild this yourself and have your own version, or just use it as a point of reference for another kind of signal that you want to create. But basically, we ran through the auto research process. We annealed a prompt that discovers things through both Google search and then also discovers new announcements directly on Product Hunt, scrapes them, scrapes the company page, grabs the URL. For each product, it actually goes through and runs it through a clay table automatically via a fire and wait system. So we basically have a Cloudflare worker that sits there after we fire off a request to a webhook. It runs through the whole thing. We set up our own API endpoint and then shoot the data back to the worker so we can fill in the blanks on, employee counts, description, and then we can, qualify out businesses from there based on all this information. We then batch classify as new product versus new feature versus is it AI? And then we look to actually fix up the company name. And that was in kind of V2. So you can see on here that some of the company names are still Lovey Formation Incorporation MCP, right? So it's showing the company name and the feature all in one go. And then we upsert that to Supabase. Here's the full Supabase schema. Anytime you create a Supabase schema, just make sure that you check it with another model that has no context. You're going to be like, hey, is this destructive? Most of the time, a query won't be destructive is my understanding most of the time, but they still can be. I'm not an expert on Supabase. I haven't destroyed anything yet, and we have about 28 tables. My only habit has been double check with a model with a blank slate, without any prior knowledge polluting its context, okay? We created the indexes, we created some policies, we hooked it up to the website, and we ran the whole thing through TriggerDev, and it's costing, estimate, about $2 a month in order to collect, roughly 60 product launches every single day, which is pretty cool. And we can only expand out from there by adding more Serper searches. So yeah, if you wanted to build this yourself, you absolutely can. I'm going to leave this entire README file directly inside of the GitHub. And you can use it as a point of reference in order to build your own custom signals over time. And again, Research Process Creator is just over here on the website. So if you need some sort of loop to help you build out the searches with some good baseline searches as reference for what good may look like, this is there for you. So about 18 minutes later, Claude has come back with its blockers. And so it needs us to run a SQL query to create some tables. Prospect and REST API upstart. The original file was missing it. Let me know when it's run. Awesome. So these are create if it doesn't exist, create if it doesn't exist, create if it doesn't exist. So it doesn't look like it's doing anything that is going to ruin my life, thankfully. Signal bank. Okay, great. Everything here looks good. So we're going to open up Supabase. We're going to dive in. We're going to see if we can run the whole thing all at once. I've never done one this big, but who knows? Maybe it's going to work just fine. And then if it runs into any issues, great, success, no problems returned. So I'm going to just let it know. Successfully created this. So we'll interrupt the goal. Success, no errors returned. All SQL queries done. And so it's going to take that and continue chugging away. And basically, it's going to get us to 80% of the way there. And this is pretty cool because I've never done a PVP this involved. Usually it's just like, hey, we pulled from this one data source and then we format the list around the one data source. So I'm excited to see how the go-to-market orchestrator is able to adapt to this extremely novel campaign. I'm sure we'll encounter some issues, but in the past, a campaign like this would take me absolute ages. But as a result of having everything that is necessary, basically, what is go-to-market orchestrator? I put together every single stage that is necessary to create any type of campaign. It has access to creating its own prompts and annealing them, creating its own research processes and annealing them, tech data through the tech site CLI, Disco-like AI Arc now it has access to Apify, has access to its own custom signals through our trigger dev plus Supabase. And basically, as a result of that, it's able to coalesce and pull from these different systems based on the goal you give it. And so now I think if this goes well, our campaigns will be almost entirely goal driven and feedback loop driven. So campaign goes live off of a goal. We have a campaign monitor that looks at everything happening across that goal and makes decisions on what to try next based on what it sees. And we close that sort of Karpathy loop. Now, we're going to let this run, and then we'll move on to our next stages, and we'll begin finalizing copy. I'll show you the copy that we're going to run with. I'll show you the businesses that we're going to target, and I'll show you the process of going back and forth to get our kind of final target list. In this case, it's going to be something outside of firmographics. It's not going to be about employee count or industry or anything like that. It's going to be what signal are they meeting, and does their team structure tell us that they're thinking about lead generation, what we do, right? We'll pull all that together. We'll send them a valuable message. And by the way, how does goal work? Basically, a goal is a new system in Claude Code that's kind of like a Ralph loop, if you heard of it going viral a few months ago. But the way you can think about it, great. So it figured out what to run, fire live, show how the script runs. Okay, great. Run this now and paste output. Goal not met yet, continuing. Okay, great. So I'm going to say, let's hand this off and you can run these prompts. So a goal is basically a Ralph loop. And so what does that mean? You give AI a plan and it will run turns. So if you don't know this already, a model is, anytime you're in a chat interface, a model is going through turns with you, right? And it's also going through turns whenever it uses a tool. So it's using the tool and then it picks it back up and takes another turn, okay? What a Ralph loop is you have a goal and many more turns that are allowed to take place based on a budget, and it will continue to figure things out over time as a result of that. I'm glad to see it didn't leak my API key. That's really, really good news. User agent is getting blocked, add user agent header. Okay, so having issues with Cloudflare, that's fine. And by the way, if you see issues like this taking place over and over again, then it's probably a good idea to pause and redirect the model, especially as context gets full like it is right now. So we'll do that shortly. But the goal system in Claude works the same way. You give it a goal, you give it set criteria, and it will run at that goal until it's finished. Now, where do you want to use it? Usually things that are non-destructive or things that have like good guardrails in place. So because I've opened Claude inside of Go-to-Market Orchestrator, you can see over here where my mouse is. Because I've opened it in Go-to-Market Orchestrator, I have confidence that as long as it stays in there, it's not going to do anything too crazy, right? And so I can give it a goal now of a very specific targeted campaign type, and it can pull together the right systems in place to meet that goal over long time horizons. And I mean super long. If you give it a million context window and you put spawn XYZ subagents in the confines of the goal and delegate, this thing could run for like 10 hours. And so you can just get so much work done as long as you have the context available. But cool thing, this is what you really want to start graduating your systems to Hermes with. So Hermes agent, I'll do an entirely separate video on how we're using that. But Hermes agent lets you orchestrate a whole team of agents with org charts, etc., from Slack. And you can do it on any model, which means as long as you have a system that's in a working state, like Go-to-Market Orchestrator, you can actually just let it run all the time, 24/7, and be your AI coworker, doing real live work every single day, every single hour, and updating you in the chat and course correcting and getting feedback from you and actually improving over time is the cool thing about Hermes. Whereas most of what happens in Claude Code, you kind of have to guide it to improve over time. Okay. Perfect. State saved, start a new session. Great. So I'm going to say /goal pause. And that's going to pause our goal. And I'm going to take this data so that we can see to and on. So it's giving me a few more tasks. So I'm going to clear this out and say confirm tasks in Go-to-Market Orchestrator that need to be done by me. And then rejig the goal prompt to continue working on this task. Also, can you resume goals across sessions? Good question to ask. And so we'll let that run. We'll complete the goal, and then we'll come back and continue working on the campaign. Now let's put everything together to build our own campaigns directly inside of Claude Code. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the discovery process, building our own signals, and I've gone to jumpstart on that, and I'll walk you through it, through to normalizing the data, finding the right people to send to, qualifying them, running various enrichments based on the criteria of the campaign, all the way through to segmenting the leads into their own campaigns, putting together copy, and then pushing it into our sequencers. In this case, I think we'll be doing LinkedIn and email because it's so signal-led. I think LinkedIn's going to be highly, highly valuable. And then, of course, having human gates in between. And so this also has a dashboard and Google Sheets alongside of it, as well as a database in Supabase. Speaking of, before you get started with anything, I would recommend setting up your own Supabase to house your market data, whether you're running ads or you're running outbounds or you just have your CRM. It can be good to have a Supabase next to it for all the enrichments that you wouldn't want necessarily showing up in your CRM all the time. So to get that set up, I would start by creating your own or getting the Supabase MCP. This is one of the cases where I think starting with the MCP makes sense. And it will walk you through the process of building out your own Supabase. Just back and forth based on what you need. And then from there, anytime you need to add a new table like you would in a Google Sheet or in Clay, all you would have to do is run a SQL query. Make sure when you run SQL queries that they're not obstructive. But for the most part, the only manual step that I have to do for any of these systems is a SQL query to make sure that I have a table where all of this data can flow to from trigger dev, like the signal we made earlier, or in terms of campaign data when it's custom campaign data. And this will let you do a really, really creative campaigns. So let's talk about the campaign we're going to build today for lead growth. So what I wanted to do is put together a signal universe based on the Apify actor. And so what we have here is our types of signals: hiring signals, funding signals, SEC signals, government and public records, a bunch of different databases. I sent out a Hermes agent last night with a goal to just build out all of these signal-led systems. And so it built out scrapers for each of them, product launches, G2 reviews, yada, 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 yada. And it put together segment scores basically by each of these signals. Now, the problem with this initial research is it was thinking about it too much from the angle of what we would want to, like signals we would want to use as lead grow. So what we needed to do is actually reframe, right? And go into mode 2, which is lead grow as signal delivery service, right? So now we're moving on to our next steps. We've done our 11-step research process inspired by the Cannonball research process from Jordan Crawford, as well as using my Reddit find tool. And we've put together a series of research and using our own internal tools as well, knowing that we have, Series A, Series B funding coming through every day from our signal monitor that you can find on our website. And then also what it might look like to draft a permissionless value email, a very Jordan Crawford style email. And so the goal is to send the prospect something like this. First name, 3 companies. Instead of 3 companies, I'm going to want it to be very particular. 3 company types, just hired a CRO this week. Here are the decision makers. I can show you the sequencing we'd run for these. And basically, we're going to give them the decision maker cards, like full blown. Like here they are, XYZ person in charge of thing. Contact information, obviously broken up so we don't send links. And I'll make that clear to the model. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take all this information and we're going to start to really chip away and hone it into a campaign brief. And then from the campaign brief, we'll start running it through the full go-to-market orchestrator. Speaking of which, go-to-market orchestrator, heavily inspired by what Eric built, would heavily recommend checking him out, Eric Nowoslavsky. I basically took what I had and what he had, and I just did like a session comparing the two and combining and taking away and combining. And unfortunately, he beat me out like 55% to 45% in terms of his build versus my build. But I'll get to that level soon, I'm sure. Now, we need to be very particular about creating our own matching logic per company. I think we'll use target market plus ICP prompts, prospect, and then is of a prospect, and then pushes that data into a query that will check the signals and the companies related to these signals. So for each signal, we're likely going to want to scrape the company homepage and get an understanding and an analysis of the signal-led companies themselves. And then based on those companies, we'll build out like a little database of the people worth contacting based on the signal, right? So for each company, there could be, 10 decision makers that we want to pull. And we'll use AI Arc for that, as well as, custom research agents if we need to through Spider Agent. And then from there, what we're going to want to do is make sure that for each of these campaigns, we, inside of the confines of the Google Sheet, we put where the data was sourced from. And the reason for that is because if we get a response, we're going to want our response agent and our SDR to be able to pull additional context from that data. And the second thing is we're probably going to want to show our work, right? So I think we have this great first email. And the second email, what we're going to want to do is like document exactly how we found the information and prove our value to the prospect as a result. And then we can start to introduce some social proof as well, right? So I think in terms of social proof, the PS line would make sense. And we can just do like a mix and match process from our case studies on the website for lead grow and mix and match the most relevant case study to the prospect. Okay. Now, the biggest thing is we need to start thinking about, based on the signals we have, the types of businesses we want to target. Now, I'm thinking for ease of use, why don't we make it so that we just target all of the funded companies across the board? And then we can plug in our own pipelines of, newly hired people or companies that are actively hiring SDRs, right? And then we can do a signal-led approach for us that delivers signals to those companies that are relevant to them. Once you have this down pat, let's create a handoff and clear up context to continue this work. And so as an outbound agency, as a marketing agency, really, I think your job is to provide value upfront these days. There's probably 150,000 agencies worldwide. And if you want to win the top accounts, it's really just a no-brainer to send something really, really valuable. And so what I would always recommend doing is trying to do the work upfront. Like this is going to be a reasonable way, because we have these signals in place, of sending something valuable to each of these companies. I'm almost certain. The hard part will be the matching logic to make sure that we're matching the right data to the right company. So the biggest part of this is that we're basically building like a mini campaign for every single prospect, right? So we're going to have to be very, very dialed with the way that we orchestrate the prospect's data chain as well. And this is something that would never be possible outside of Claude Code. It would take like dozens upon dozens of formulas inside of Clay, dozens of formulas inside Google Sheets, so many that it would be impossible to orchestrate it for most people without making significant mistakes. And it would just take hours and hours on end. What this lets us do is orchestrate a lot of different data sources all at once to coalesce them into very directly valuable emails where someone goes, okay, these guys are pretty legit. Now, it's finished the handoff. And what we're going to do with this handoff is look to start finalizing the architecture of the system. And so the first step is going to be creating our signal, right? See what to do now, clear. Next session kicks off with building signal companies, homepage research plus DMPL. Those are the foundation everything else sits on. Great. And so I'm going to take this information and I'm going to clear context, because I do not want context that is negative polluting my system. We're going to provide this, and I'm just going to give it a gentle push of direction one more time, right? To really solidify the goal in place. And actually, this might be a good chance to use the /goal feature. So let's do that. /goal, right? Review the handoff provided here, but also the goal here is to make sure we have a list of signal companies that are categorized. So you're going to want to check research process builder for relevant prompts, as well as auto prompt creator for relevant prompts that we can reuse for figuring out what a company's target market is, who's their ICP is, etc. Set a cost limit for this initiative of $25, let's say. And then in parallel, you're going to want to start looking at that data and what's most common across the data, like evaluate it, and start thinking of what types of businesses we would target with the data for the most part, right? And then based on that, we can pull relevant lists of the most likely business targets, starting with our own signal-led, right? So we'll have, an API actor that pulls lists of businesses that are actively hiring sales positions and sales personnel. But number two, are already in place Series A and funding signals. And number 3, we can have more of a one-to-many campaign through Disco-like, where we take the common websites that are showing up that would qualify for a very good signal-led message in PvP, and we take that and we use Disco-like in order to start building out that kind of list. And so you can think of it as one campaign with many segments. And based on this, what you're going to want to do is finalize the campaign brief, start up the Google Sheet for the campaign, and then start working our way through go-to-market orchestrator with me. So the goal is done when we're ready for our step-by-step go-to-market orchestrator work, okay? I was afraid Whisperflow was failing there. So we're going to let this goal chug, and then we're going to come back and continue through the process. We're back, and it's been a little bit. So basically, I gave it a goal to try to one-shot a campaign that's way too complicated, and so now we ran into some issues, so I had to stop it, and now we're going to course correct. So it's gone back and done maybe 2 or 3 runs, right? Filling in data, getting things ready, and basically what we have here is we have the baseline copy that we're looking to send, which is basically like, look, 3 category companies closing funding rounds will be looking to hire new leadership, make budget decisions over important thing that you do in the next 90 days. Here's 3 contacts to add to your outbound motion, yada, yada, yada. Email 2, email 3. And this is the rough system that we're going to use to generate these emails. Now, these emails come from multiple streams, and I'm going to show you how I've laid out my thinking in a document. I'm going to get it to make a mermaid diagram so it doesn't get lost with the campaign briefing and update the campaign briefing. And then we'll set a new goal and we'll see if it course corrects in one shot, which I think it will. So let me lay out exactly what needs to happen. We need to have one sheet that is our prospects. Our prospects are enriched, already done. Then we need to have another sheet that contains all our businesses with signals. These businesses with signals about them across funding, new leadership, actively hiring for leadership position, and potentially product at launches are main signals that we use to determine whether or not a company is in a buying state. The data we want every company is size, location, type of company, and more semantic version of it using a description. We also enriched target market on our prospect companies, as well as what their rough ICP is. And then we take all that and we go through tier 2, which is new leadership hires, people hired in the last 90 days into leadership positions. And we want to pull contacts, right, at the signal companies, right? Signal companies. And those contacts are the contacts we want to deliver to the Google Sheet companies. So I wonder if I can quickly draw that in. We want to deliver the contacts back to our enriched prospects and basically match them. Let's make this. So what we do is inside it, then using those chat tiles. Great. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it this logic. And I'm going to get to actually, like I'm download this as an MD file. And I'm going to give it this logic and create an MD, a mermaid as well. And so the last thing I'm going to add here is that once we complete all this, then we can start adding different prospect data streams, the ones we are going to send to. So this is literally one campaign with multiple segments running through it, right? One campaign. And then other campaigns might be, new CROs get a sequence like this. We'll add in after. Another campaign might be newly funded companies that get a sequence like this after, right? And we'll basically just drip feed high value targets for them, right? Over time, okay? But start here and make the other shit a future plan. Great. So let's grab that. Let's download it. Let's throw it into Claude. We're literally just going to drag it in there. Let's open up our file system. Where did that save? It's not good. Let's go back here. Where'd you save this, man? It's in downloads, but you wouldn't tell me where it was. Interesting. Okay. So we've got to do a couple things here. We have our kind of breakdown of where we are, which is up here, which I forgot to copy and paste, which is silly. Call to action sucks, yada, yada, yada. So I'm going to give it this. And that should be good. Oh my God, I'm losing my mind here. And then I'm going to say, okay, and I've attached a file path to a download that lays out exactly what needs to happen. It's called exactly what needs to happen MD. You're going to add that to the campaign briefing doc, and you're going to create a mermaid diagram that you bounce off me that shows you really do understand the pathways that exist for this
to become a complete campaign, right? One complete campaign. And then additionally, future campaign pathways to build on this in the future. And so we're going to let it come back to us. We're going to let it build the mermaid. And then we're going to actually switch to Opus because it's such a complex campaign that I want to make it easier for the model to kind of orchestrate. And I'm going to tell it to orchestrate as many sub-agents as possible to just rip through this at this point, because I want this done yesterday. I want us to have a final campaign that we can throw up. And then we'll actually go back and forth together, and we'll check out the results of the campaign in a future video. Okay. I think Claude is mad at me because I think it's saying that a mermaid diagram is simply not going to cut it. So it's broken this down in a crazy HTML diagram here. Okay, future pipelines built after campaign 1 live, signal pipeline, weekly refresh, prospect pipeline, run 1, spice and launch, PVP, funding variant, hiring variant. Okay, so in my opinion, it's still confused. So we're going to go back for one more iteration. There we go. So as this moves along the pipeline, it understands that there's a Google Sheet that exists. The only gap here is that it says Crunchbase. The signals feed isn't from Crunchbase, but anyway. So it understands that there's future prospects streams and it's grayed them out. It understands exactly what needs to be enriched on every single prospect, the people we email. It understands what needs to be enriched on signal companies. It understands how to match across signal companies. See, expanding buyer titles, yada, 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 contact tier logic, AIR DM pull. It understands that it needs to match these people to the prospects, right? Find signal companies where target market overlaps, pick top 3 by fit score, pull matching contacts from those 3 companies. Sick. Generate 3 PVP email copy. And so the only other change I'm going to get to make is I'm going to say, I would like to actually look at all the signal companies and distill all the job titles that we're seeing, right? Look at all the prospects companies and distill all the job titles that we're seeing and actually make a list of all those job titles that we can just pull up front from these companies. Instead of having more complex matching logic downstream, we get them all as we need them and we can just do lookups to that data. And Bob's your uncle. We have an email that is absolutely sendable, and we can really see that these are medical companies. And it looks like this. Raj, 2 health tech companies just closed funding rounds. They'll be looking to hire new leadership and make budget decisions over engineering workflows in the next 90 days. Here's 2 contacts to add to your outbound motion. Does your team have signals like this set up to enable them yet? Happy to share notes on how to set up signals like these. Perfect. And then we have a few different call to actions that we share. And basically what the process was to get to here is this, which one of the best things you can do is just get visual explanations done at the end of campaigns. So you know what's going on. And so we went through 7 waves. We started with raw data. It says import from Google Sheets, which is a bit silly, but oh, no, that's actually true. We started off with some SaaS companies that we knew were qualified. We, as like B2B, we pulled signal companies from Supabase, from our automated signal system for checking for funding. We dropped the hiring workflow for now. We dropped the product launch workflow for now. We'll reintroduce that later after automating this. And then with that automated campaign, we'll just be able to refill campaigns every week on a schedule. And we'll just run basically the workflow described here through TriggerDev. We LLM classify every prospect and we pull a decision maker per prospect. So this is just to figure out what their target market is and their value proposition and their ICP and the business types, as well as the job titles that they like to target. Then we pull 2 exact job titles per business and expand them out to relevant job titles that people would actually have. So if it's like semantic, marketing leaders, right? We'll get a little bit more distinct. Then we deduplicate those titles across the entire list. So we have no redundant titles so that when we do an AI arc enrichment across the list for all the titles, we can just pull all the titles in bulk, okay? And the reason we pull all the titles in bulk is because we don't want to have, row by row enrichments happening that are very costly to communicate back with the classification and communicate back with the Supabase up here, right? Then we move on to our email waterfall for both sets of lists, right? We work on the matching between each prospect. So we match each prospect to 2 prospects that are relevant. We did a disco-like prospect expansion. So we took our 2953 And all the prospects that got matches, we then matched or expanded them out so that we get more companies just like them that will match. And so we actually tripled the number of matches that we had just by doing this disco-like prospect expansion. And then we pushed a bison, uploaded, and attached leads to a campaign, which 347 leads with per lead copy is not correct. It came out to 618 qualified leads where we had 70% contact email hit rate. So that's the basic system. Now let's walk through how you can do it, how you can deploy it into your own Claude Code. And it's best to do this yourself because if you borrow other people's systems, you won't understand how they work. It's a black box. So I'll go through the full system architecture of setting up go-to-market from Claude Code. But if you don't want to set up your own architecture, right, you can use something called Deepline. So Deepline, open it up. And so this will give you a bunch of API keys out of the box. And if you pay $3.95 a month, then you can sync to a database, okay? I wouldn't recommend paying the $3.95, to be honest. I would just do it yourself. However, the key here is that this could cost money in the future to run, right? So use it with a grain of salt, but for people just getting started with running go-to-market from Claude Code, this is probably one of your best bets. How do you set up something like this for yourself? Well, if you're not going to go the CLI route with Deepline CLI, then you can probably just use this or start with Eric Noah Slosky's Cold Outbound Skills. I think they're fantastic and are a lot of what I actually carried over to here. It had interactivity, UX. I believe about 50% of the skills are adaptations of skills directly from Cold Outbound Skills, and the other 50 skills are skills I built. That said, went through a lot of iterations with those skills to like wiggle them to my workflows. You have to really be careful about carrying over skills. Now, I'm going to leave this as available to anyone who watches this video, but let's walk through how it works. Basically, what you have is you have stages. Stages are things every list needs to go through. Problem: how do you get AI to remember what the heck is going on without fantastic memory? Well, you can input memory, or you can just use Git. Now, GitHub has awesome project management, which means that you can actually go through and basically create your own Kanban board and create projects within your repo to make it so that every time you do a task inside of a client repo, it becomes a project that gets tracked with issues, which are basically tasks. So I built that directly into the system. This system communicates back and forth with you. It's how we made that really complicated PvP campaign. But what it's a lot better at is actually just standard campaigns, right? Mapping your TAM, creating signals, having your TAM here, having other lists over here, and creating signals, right? But the important thing is that your TAM and the signals and enrichments all need a source of truth that is not just Git. Because if you do campaign data and just Git, it's going to implode completely. It will completely implode. So what do you need to do instead? You need to have campaign data and your signals and your people data flowing into Supabase, or just a Postgres SQL database, or any database you like. If you are at massive scale, you can probably use Clay's database, PlanetScale. For those of you who didn't know, that's the kind of company behind Clay's massive data processing capabilities. I imagine they're on a Metal database and on some sort of AWS server with insane load, right? You're not going to need that, I'd imagine, but you're going to need a database that captures everything as it goes. Because if you do an LLM call and a prompt goes in to Mr. AI and he has an output, if that entire output doesn't go into a CSV, you lose data, right? So instead, every time, just like in Clay, you want to make sure that AI outputs go to a table. Why not Google Sheets? Well, you could use Google Sheets, but I think it's just way less durable and way less scalable. It also doesn't unite your data as well. The beauty of this system is that as your data goes through, you get the benefit of checking your database before you run enrichments, right? And that means you can fill in the blanks on things with rules, so you save money. So this has 19 stages. It goes from discover to Clay format to Clay enrich to Clay join back, yada, yada, yada. And basically, this is a standard Clay table that exists that gets passed to through the Clay CLI, where you've got a list, right, that you pulled from Disco-like, and maybe you're missing LinkedIn's or websites. Instead of making that a complicated process, all I do is pass that off to a tried and tested Claygen by using Cloudflare workers and fire and wait, which basically turns Clay into a big API. And that means that it processes all of that data through Clay and pops it back out the other end via a callback URL, which then can get pushed into Supabase. Okay. So basically turning Clay into an API. If you need your own version of this, top of funnel, Brandon Charlson, he's got an open source Clay CLI that you can borrow. Okay. From there, we move down to qualifying our ICP. This is a simple prompt. And this is where loops come in, right? Auto context, which is a loop that I talked about earlier, and auto research, which is that Carpathy loop we talked about. So this is where you say, great, I need to qualify this. What level of model? What's the cost? What are my desired outputs? And do we have any parameters that exist in the first place? Let's go through that process. And then once we're qualified, we start to work on enrichments, right? We start to work on enrichments that may be relevant to the copy we've provided. And by the way, all of this starts, of course, with a campaign briefing. This is everything after campaign briefing and copy. And it will adapt enrichments based on their JSON to come back as what you need for the copy. That's the beauty of having your copy up front. And anything that's not possible gets a fallback. Okay, pause. Now, anytime you're doing an enrichment that is not just AI like this, not just a prompt, I believe you should run that through something durable. That can be an API call, right? That can be a web research agent, like a GPT-4o mini with Firecrawl, or any of the above, right? I think those should be run through something like TriggerDev. TriggerDev will handle the concurrency and the durability out of the box so that as your processes run, if they run into, oh, we hit our rate limit, right? It's not just going to fail, right? It's actually just going to keep going until it's done. And that's handled out of the box and it's super cheap. We run like hundreds of thousands of processes out of TriggerDev every month for like $12, right? And we're only adding more, right? It's going to probably hit millions over the next month or two because we're moving a lot of what we do on N8N over here to make it durable. From there, we have our find people, which again is a waterfall system. So we start with AI Arc. And then we move on to custom agents, right? Again, TriggerDev comes in. Then we have our email waterfall, and that runs through our Supabase cache to check million verifier, kit, ICPs, lead magic, all get million verified at the end. And then we filter based on MX provider to block domains that don't make sense. In fact, we also have an MX pre-filter over here. This accounts for any mismatches between what a domain came back as and what their email provider ended up being. I don't know why that happens, but it happens sometimes. This domain pre-filter makes so we can block these bad domains that we don't want to send to up front and just store them away for future reference in case we want to use them. From there, we enrich contacts, we segment, apply the segmentation, we apply copy, and we start to personalize. Then it all comes down to whether or not we want to do one-to-one AI copy, which I'll have a video covering coming out very shortly, how you build a one-to-one AI copy system that isn't just a template, like it's a real AI SDR. And from there, we make sure all of our personalizations are QA controlled, right? QA checked. And then we prepare for launch, and it'll launch it automatically directly in Bison for us to the correct client workspace. And that brings me back to where Supabase comes in. You really want Supabase to house all of your important like variables. So like if it's not a secret, obviously. So like your workspace ID for like your smart lead or your Bison should be directly in Supabase. From there, we move on to our launch substages, which is we create campaigns, we upload copy, we select inboxes, and we go through routing leads, standards check, and making sure leads go in the right places. And this is basically how data moves through the pipeline. If a company is in multiple segments, we score the segments and put it in the highest score segment, which relates to AI copy. And the reason you want to have all these systems, minus Google Sheets, that's gone now. I got to get that updated. The reason you want all these systems in place is because it allows for observability. So as this passes down this entire pipeline, by the way, Git is basically a Kanban board, right? Keeping that campaign right there between sessions so that you don't forget where the campaign is between sessions. And alongside that, there's something called a manifest doc, I call it, which is basically your briefing, but it tracks everything that's done throughout the process. That's why earlier in this video, I was able to show you the entire process on that dashboard of going through and building that PvP campaign, because the manifest went with it. So we have something tried and true at the other end, and that gets stored in Supabase. Why is this valuable? Because if you have a campaign that does good, right, you can point a Hermes agent at it, right, an autonomous agent that just checks for good campaigns. And then that Hermes agent can go manifest, ooh, right? SOP, campaign expansion and just go to town and get new leads shoved into that campaign, which makes you right? So SQLite, you don't have to worry too much about this. This is just like the localized version of Supabase. It's not anywhere near as consistent, but I like to have both available to make things easy. Every workflow writes back to Supabase, especially the cloud ones. That's Clay, that's TriggerDev, and everything gets Git marked. So it's an issue, it gets tracked. And what this means is that all of your systems, because this is just a plugin at LeadGrow, right? It's wrapped up hooks and skills and tools all in one little box that we can transfer over. And so because it's all wrapped up like that, what we get to do is, and has Git, we get to transfer that to our team, and our team can pick up campaigns wherever they are in the pipeline, right? On whatever client with the right context, right? And so that means I can make a strategy and hand it off to anyone on my team, and they can continue on with the process, okay? So this includes a ton of integrated services. We have Kit, ICPs, Lead Magic. These will probably be changing. Really interested in looking at Blitz API and Quick Enrich. I really like the founders, and I think consolidating tech stack is really, really valuable. We obviously have AI Arc. We have Clay on the back end still, which over time, I think Clay will be a replacement, but out of the box, it has a lot of valuable APIs to tap into for reasonable prices. And if you can treat it like an API and you don't have to go into the interface, you're in a pretty good spot. Inside the system, the one thing that's forgotten is the Spintax spam checker, which is basically part of campaign prep. And that uses email guard plus our own list of spam words to basically self-anneal copy in a loop, right? And make sure it's good to go. So with all the skills you learned in this video, you should be able to take this and turn it into your own version of it. We have our hooks over here. If you ever need hooks, use the Claude Code setup skill to make your own hooks like we discussed earlier. But you have all of the tools necessary. Make your own integrations, right? Using this as a framework to carry this over to anything, whether it's a content pipeline or anything else, it's all just stages, right? And Git with Supabase storage, right? So you don't lose anything. That means that you're gonna have to have campaign IDs, right? Identification, right? Consistent naming convention. And you're gonna have to have consistent stages for the most part that don't break. And you're going to have a set of hooks that prevent things from going anywhere if they're not done. So we have one thing that happens between stage 2 and stage 3, which basically makes sure that if a list is missing core context for future states, that is a pre-check before it moves on. And this is what I was talking about earlier in the video with skill chaining. Skill chaining is where the output of one skill or one system is pre-curated to be good as the input for skill number 2, okay? You should be thinking about skill chaining if you want to make workflows, especially if you want to have a system where happy days, winning campaign, an agent goes and just YOLOs its way through the whole system, right? YOLO mode. Now, this has 28 skills across categories, including our own out-of-the-box skills, list normalization with MX check, makes it Clay compatible, formats it to have all of our, camel case that we enjoy. We have a briefing maker. We have a one-to-one copy generator that routes through TriggerDev for anyone. And soon what we're going to be adding is a knowledge graph, right? That lives inside of it. That isn't just, a client is on, tier 3, so they get a knowledge graph from us. It's going to be every client ships with a knowledge graph and context gets injected at runtime. So we do this one-to-one copy. And what happens is Supabase holds ICP, right? And we have one workflow in TriggerDev that's ICP prompts. And we just inject ICP per client at runtime before we batch process a list. That is the future. And that's where systems become very transferable. And we can have our workflows deployed at scale and provide more value than anyone else could possibly provide to our clients, because every system works out of the box as long as we get the initial context correct. So that's how the system works. It comes out of the box with checkpoints, brief immutability, cost tracking, a state model through SQLite and not Google Sheets anymore, Supabase, a dry run mode to make sure things are working, and a pre-flight mode to track alongside in GitHub, but also, right, we can test enrichments just like in Clay, 10 rows at a time before, via the checkpoint system, before moving on and running the whole thing. That is what makes a Claude Code go-to-market system that is actually useful and usable. And here's the breakdown of Supabase. And here's the breakdown of the issues pipeline with labels, stages, so on and so forth. So what can you do to get started on this? Take this and turn it into a representation of what a stateful high context workflow looks like. And I would recommend merging it with the context OS from Jacob Deal, right? That thing we discussed earlier. And basically you'll have a knowledge graph for your business plugged in, right, to a good template of a system to build for your go-to-market workflows. Do not duplicate this, right, out of the box. A good system to duplicate for your go-to-market workflows, right? That includes how systems work together, right? We have Apify scrapers in here now based on what we built earlier in the video, and how to make sure you have durability, observability, and multiplayer Claude Code systems. Because if no one else can use it, you're cooked. Once you build it out by using GSD and Matt Pocock's skills in phases, you turn it into a plugin and then multiplayer unlock. Also, definitely make a dashboard because this makes it way easier to explain, right? It's got all the milestones of the timeline of using this. Super cool. Anyway, if you are a B2B business with a market of over 25,000 companies and an offer that is a minimum of $15,000 in lifetime value per prospect, or you're a product-led growth motion SaaS with a lower cost product, but a big market, and you want something like this embedded into your business to drive it forward, book a call with myself and we'll build out a big, beautiful strategy to show you how hard we can kick ass for your go-to-market. So now let's get a touch more advanced and get into security settings, and also probably the most powerful out-of-the-box tool that Claude Code gives you to get started in your workspace, okay? So you've got your Claude MD, you've got your ENV, you've maybe set up a couple tools. Now it's time to think about how those tools can be influenced by some of the systems we talked about, like agents, MCPs, skills, hooks, okay? And so in order to do that, all you're going to do is press / and you're going to type in Claude, and there's going to be something called Automation Recommender. Now, if you don't have it yet, you're going to grab the plugin. To get a plugin, you go to Claude and you type in /plugin, and you'll be able to go to plugins to manage your plugins. Inside your plugins, there'll be a lot of different cool stuff. When you want to discover a plugin, you simply type it in, and this is an out-of-the-box Claude plugin. If it's not available to you yet, all you have to do is install the Claude plugins official marketplace, okay? And that's going to give you access to 174 available plugins, of which I have only 3 installed. Now, this is a good opportunity to explain plugins to you guys. Plugins are great for team-led systems. And the reason they're great for team-led systems is because you can have plugins with permissions and plugins with controls. So that means you can take a whole bunch of awesome skills, right? Skills and agents, right? And you can wrap them up into something called a marketplace. And inside your marketplace, which you can just think of this as like this is Wholesale Club, this is Costco. Everyone goes here to find things that work, okay? And you can have a company marketplace for every department, right? Every department housed in it. Whether you're at Walmart or Costco for toothpaste or disturbing amount of cinnamon buns, there's something for everyone. From there, your marketplace can become a plugin, and that makes it so you have a version controlled and installable set of skills and systems. The key here is that based on permissions, you can actually say, oh, well, this department can only see these skills and systems, right? Visibility. They can only actually see certain skills and systems, but other ones over here might be blocked off, okay? So all of that's to say, plugins are where you start getting advanced to start coordinating with your team and providing them powerful skills that make them better, okay? Now, when you go to the plugin page, you're going to be using your keyboard in the terminal to up, down, right? Move across things, not clicking. And you would just type in Claude setup, something like that, Claude or setup. It's not going to exist in my Discover, but basically you're going to get the plugin that you can see installed here, which is setup, Claude Code setup. And that displays itself as, so we can exit this, /automation recommender. You can literally just run this. And what this is going to do is look at your entire repo, just like what it says, your entire code base, and make recommendations on what you can change and improve. So let's do that. And just like that, it's done and gives us some great ideas. So it's like, hey, man, you should consider having the Supabase MCP. A key here is that this skill doesn't do a good job of detecting CLIs. And so it's going to recommend you a lot of MCPs. I would mostly recommend the recommend ignoring the MCP recommendations. Pipeline has 28 stage specific test files that map one-to-one stage catching regressions we need to edit, prevents test pass but fails, or which painful debugging campaign. Auto run stage tests on edit. That's really cool. Brief validator. Bad briefs fail late. Stage 2 rejects list. Stage 6 tie breaks explode. So have a briefing validator. And so I might say that that's probably a reference file within the briefing creation skill. Stage coverage, large but growing fast. When a new stage file lands, it's easy to ship with missing edge case coverage. Idempotency, this stage services untested branches. Awesome. 2 of these look pretty good. I think the stage coverage reviewer actually makes sense as a subagent. So let's keep that. Brief validator probably doesn't make sense as a separate skill. Instead, it can be a reference file and piece of the puzzle for our briefing creation skill as a final step with reference to spawn a subagent and check the briefing to QA control it. And then I really liked your recommendation of a hook for better idempotency. What a word, man. Idempotency. Yikes. And I think that's going to help with better state control and version control. Is there anything we can do to facilitate project management a little bit more cleanly as we work through the go-to-market orchestration via maybe GitHub issues or GitHub projects, their kind of in-house project management system, to make it so we don't lose track of the campaign pipeline mid-campaign if we have to transfer between people? And I'll run through that. And I'll say, once it's done, let's idempotency. I'll say, let's set up a planning session and implementation. And within the next 30 minutes, all of these things will be installed. And the more things you have available within your code base, the better it can recommend changes. And you can also give it direction. So you can say, let's look at this system and let's look at it from this lens. What recommendations would you make based on the code base, right? You can pair this with the Matt Pocock skills that I referenced previously. And if you run the setup process on Matt Pocock, it will be able to do something called Grill Me with Docs. And that will ask you a ton of questions about what you care about, which is basically just a more involved version of this system that will get you to more advanced outcomes, let's say. And so here we are. No human action, campaign checkpoint, live in Bison, client slug, campaign issue, 1 issue per campaign, auto-threaded. Awesome. And then each campaign will be identifiable by campaign name as a result of client slugs being in campaign names, right? If correct, then you can begin planning out this system and we'll work on implementation. Great job. Burning water to say great job to an AI model, not recommended. Now, the next thing I want to get into quickly is, as you go through this process, we talked about hooks protecting your ENV, and that can do it in a variety of kind of interesting ways. But the number one thing you actually want to do is add a hard deny in your settings.json. So all that's going to be is going to Claude and being like, hey, Claude, I want to protect my ENVs via settings.json globally. Please implement a hard deny on anything that tries to directly access environment variables uqt, and it'll just build it for you in one shot. Okay. So that's basically all you need to know about security as you just start out. Once you start sharing between your team, you're going to want to start considering running your environment variables through something like a password manager, but I think that's a whole nother video in itself. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but for sake of people who want to just explore themselves, look up some security principles, look up what it takes to run things through a password manager, and then consider having your LLM calls run through a gateway. So LLM Lite will give you a gateway that coordinates all of your models like OpenRouter would as well, but does it in a slightly more secure manner, and you get better rate limits as far as I can tell. Plus, you get observability built in. So Langfuse will tell you your agent checked this data, and it helps you diagnose where context injection is going wrong. Okay. Warning, this next section is a yap fest. So if you just want to see building, you can continue on. But I think this is very, very important, probably the most important thing to understand in order to get the most out of your AI operating system. Okay. So this is a repo that I think is one of the best starting foundational points for managing your context. And for people who need to know what context is, basically, context is the unique information that you provide a model to make it do something different, right? This is your unique advantage every time you engage with AI to get an output that other people can't get. Okay. If you look at AI across the board, Claude Code kind of blew up, not because it had the most powerful model at the moment, but because it had the most powerful harness. And the harness is basically everything that surrounds the model in terms of tools, system prompt, as well as kind of baseline prompt before the user interacts with it. Okay. So it sets like foundational direction, but you still have to set a lot more direction with tools as well as prompts that you provide it. What this gives you is something called a knowledge graph that updates over time. And this helps you have topics linked to each other. My recommendation would be when you bring in all your transcripts after building the transcript skill with me, you want to take all of that information and shove it into this knowledge system. Just give Claude Code the Jacob Deal context OS and shove it in. Why would you want this? Well, how many times have you said something in a conversation, opened a new conversation, and then had to repeat yourself? You want to get rid of as much copy paste and repeating yourself as possible. Number two, by doing that, you allow yourself to have unique context that is version controlled and traceable. Okay, traceable. What do I mean by traceable? Well, if you run my favorite example is AI copywriting. Okay, so if you run AI copywriting, and you have a prompt, right? And that prompt gets fed by this knowledge node, this knowledge node, and this knowledge node. You know exactly what produced this output, right? But if you have this same prompt with no knowledge graph, right? And no routine way of getting information into the node, right? Into the context window, right? Then the model might go here, it might go there, it might go everywhere. Shake it all up, shake it all around, and you're left with an output that is a question mark because you don't know where it came from. So that is basically, to bring this full circle, what a skill does, right? Your skill is giving progressive disclosure, progressive context based on the need you've defined and giving you a desired output, right? Now, the reason a context graph and a knowledge graph is so effective at building your leverage within AI systems is because you can go back, right, and inject this context into one skill, right? But then you can also inject that context into another skill, and it's just a file name, right? So imagine you have a file that says ICP, right? And you want that injected into this skill, and this skill. It's much easier if ICP exists as a version-controlled file, but also imagine if one prompt says something like persona equals individual contributor, right? Hopefully familiar for a lot of people here. And your skill has this injected, but this, right, ICP now has a bubble over here that says persona IC. The agent can now navigate to that via the knowledge graph without having to do a bunch of grep searches all over the place that just fan out agents to go find stuff and burn tokens and fill up your context with garbage. It now has direct pathways between contexts that is relevant to one another, which means your prompt could change, right? And provide different context. And you would have a system that can fetch the things that are actually relevant to it, only as relevant as you build your knowledge graph. The beauty of this is that knowledge graphs are very agent oriented. So agents maintain them for you, which makes it much easier. I'm not going to go too much deeper into this, but what this does is it makes it so you can have layers of context within your system that are a little bit less all over the place. So what that means is you can have absolute concrete context, right? Your business. You can have context that is emergent, right? Maybe you ran a campaign and you saw something working and you want to keep testing it before it goes up here. And then you have context that is like research driven, right? And that's like, this might be valuable, but we don't know until we test it, right? So from a go-to-market operations perspective, hopefully you can see is that this knowledge graph and rule set makes it so that you avoid getting bad information into the models that doesn't make sense. And you can also trace when bad information does enter the models, so you can root it out like a bad weed. This is basically, honestly, like this is the absolute definition. This is gardening, okay? you're planting all these great things and then weeds show up and you got to call the weeds, but you can't just like spray the whole thing with pesticides because you kill your plants, right? This is going to give you that tool set to be successful in getting rid of all the weeds so you can get the best high leverage outputs. Okay. So highly recommend it. GitHub.com/Jacob-Deedle/context-OS. Okay. This is foundational. He's honestly like one of the smartest dudes I've ever met in my life. And his videos give me a lot of foundational thinking on ontology and things like that, as well as epistemology and how AI is basically just a knowledge system that you direct. And so your understanding of how knowledge relates to each other equals the best outputs. And that all comes down to prompting. And if you can prompt well, you're in a good spot, but you also need the prompt to find information for you. So there's leverage, right? Now, let's get into more building. Super quick, I was just looking back over this recording, and since I recorded this, I made a Richard Feynman skill. If you don't know who that is, he's just like one of the greatest physics and I guess quantum mechanics educators there ever was, and also just world leading in the field himself. And I basically just took his principles and I made a skill that explains things really well because that's what he was good at, and I honestly I kind of suck at it in comparison. So what this does is it takes any of these complex concepts and it will fill things in and give you a proper metaphor to think about it with, right? And so you can just give the skill context about what you do in your day-to-day life, and it will give you metaphors for these things that are rooted in your reality. So you understand them, right? If you're an engineer, you're going to think differently than if you're a salesperson, right? So you can see it works pretty well. Skills markdown file containing context, who you are, what you're selling, constraints, examples, yada, yada, yada. A go-to-market team without skills is retraining the AI on every task. So it goes through like value proposition and why you might think it matters, and gives you to think of it like agents, sub-processes that perform multiple steps, and basically arm a context window with context that persists across all the skills it uses, right? Gives you a nice little metaphor. So I'm going to include this in the repository for anyone to use. Highly recommend.